You're watching Reddit Aliens, the weekly compilation. No relief, no breaks. Just story after story sinking deeper into the dark. If you're listening with headphones, good. If you're alone, better. Enjoy now and subscribe.
What are your most disturbing or unsettling memories from your childhood? Not safe for work. Getting up in the middle of the night to get a glass of water to find my 13-year-old big brother with his back pressed to the door holding a knife. He told me to get down, and the handle started jiggling and the door shaking. We spent the next 20 to 30 minutes watching shapes in the dark creep around the yard. I don't really know what bothers me the most. People trying to get into our house, my brother ready to kill someone if they tried, or the fact that we were alone and I never knew where my mom was at 2 a.m. while it was happening. When I was 6, my neighbor's daughter would babysit me. She was around 19 or 20. She wasn't particularly nice to me. Sometimes I had to go over there very, very early and would sleep. I was a bedwetter, and she refused to get up to help clean me off and would get furious if I tried myself, so I would just lay on the floor in my own pee until she woke up. She would also tell me we were going to play hide and seek, and then I'd hide and wait and wait and wait, and then, thinking I'd really bested her, I'd come out from my hiding spot and she'd be painting her nails or some such. Her mother's boyfriend also held me over a toilet by one leg with a lit Bic at it lighter in front of my face. Told me he'd kill me and my mom and dad if I ever said anything. My babysitter's boyfriend would also be around sometimes. One day I was coloring on the bed with the two of them when she got up and left to use the bathroom. Her driver's license was lying on the bed, and he picked it up and chewed it. When she came back, he told her I did it, and I got in trouble. It really unsettled me because it was so bizarre, and I knew it even then. He did other weird things that I can no longer remember. I knew grown-ups were not supposed to act like him, and I tried my best to stay away from him after that. Not 2 weeks after that, he smothered my babysitter, killing her and her unborn child. I was not there, but I could have been, and I wondered what would have happened to me if I had been. Having to crawl out of my bedroom window and run to a neighbor one night to call an ambulance for my mother who had tried to kill herself because she couldn't handle staying with her abusive ex anymore. I was 10. Even better, my bitch of a teacher treating me like shit for missing a bit of school the next day to go see her in the hospital, and yes, the teacher knew the reason. I lived in an apartment in a real bad neighborhood growing up. But one of the worst is when I was about 11 years old and a drunk neighbor tried to flirt with me and asked me to take my clothes off when I was playing on my scooter, and then chased my mom up the stairs with a massive knife when she came out and yelled at him to leave me alone. I'm pretty sure I was almost sexually assaulted by a family member when I was a really young kid. I just remember him locking the door and saying, "Lie here with me," in a weirdly kind voice, while tapping the bed, and for some reason, very obvious now, I didn't like the situation and started crying so damn loud that he had to open the door. From time to time I remember that, but never said anything about it to anyone ever. Feels good saying for the first time. In the middle of the night, I woke up to seeing shadows from the window of people trying to break in. I was scared and tried to go to my parents' room. My mom was making weird noises and I thought maybe she was having an asthma attack. My parents wouldn't let me in their room. They were doing the deed. I couldn't sleep hearing all the weird noises. The people never made it to the house, but they robbed gym clothes from my dad's car parked outside. Going over to a friend's house when I was maybe 10, and I caught him and his dad having a loud argument at the garage. I hid behind a nearby trash can and saw the dad pull out a gun and actually shoot his son in the leg. I freaked out and ran home to tell my parents, but nobody believed me until the police and ambulance showed up. It's hard to explain, but I saw the bullet penetrate his leg in what felt like slow motion. It still comes to my mind every now and then. When I was about 5, my older cousin's best friend killed someone. My cousin helped him hide for a couple days. Cops got tipped off, warrant was issued, and with my cousin being a multiple-time felon himself, decided to run as well. At one point, he came to my parents' house to try talking with my dad. My dad didn't want to hear it and threatened to call the cops. Cousin took off, got into a police chase, drove on the wrong side of one of our main roads, hit a car, then flipped his car over a guardrail into the river. I was completely oblivious to everything. I just remember my dad screaming at my cousin. Found out all this stuff later, and it was a huge what the fuck moment. My cousin did like 15 years in prison. Friendly strangers stopped me at Disneyland and followed my family around for a while. Asked where we were staying, and I don't know any better as a kid, so I told them. Dude showed up with a friend at the hotel pool waiting for me. I thought to call out the guy, but my instincts made me hold back. Still don't know if that was a child trafficker to this day. My mom was dating this dude, and we were living with him. One morning I hear super loud bangs in the door, and I run out with my blanket, and I hear my mom screaming, "Don't shoot my dogs, they're friendly," as I walked from the hallway to where the front door is. So I'm standing there with my blanket around me, and she opens the door, and there's a SWAT team pointing their guns at me, yelling for me to drop my blanket on the ground. Then, they proceeded to tear the house apart, including my room. Scared the shit out of me. I don't remember the exact details, but my mom said he was an ex-biker gang or something, and they were hitting a bunch of members. I was at a friend's house, and we went to a deep creek to catch frogs and turtles. From the top of the bank, we spotted a swollen dead deer covered in maggots. My friend's little brother pushed me off of the bank, and I landed on the deer. It burst and kinda deflated under me, and I just laid there crying and throwing up until my friend's parents came and got me. They hosed me down on the driveway and tossed me in their pool that they had just chlorinated. Super great. My mother used to lock me in the bathroom and beat the living shit out of me. I was 6 years old, and I remember that my dad usually didn't do anything about it, but this one time, he did. I was locked up with my mother, and my dad was banging on the door and yelling that she had to let me out. She was yelling and beating me with a hairbrush. This was the first time my dad stepped in. After that night, my mother came into our bedroom. I still slept with my mom and dad, and she started fucking me up with a coat hanger, and my dad jumped on me to protect me, and then my mother proceeded to pull her own hair out and started to slap her face with the same hanger. Her nose was bleeding, and tons of hair were on the ground. I did not know what is wrong with her, and I still don't since she isn't in my life anymore, 19 now, but thing like this would happen every day, and nobody believes me. Recently told my grandpa about it though. He believed me but didn't know all of this shit happened, and it hurt him that his son, my dad, never stepped up. I was 7. My family took me to the circus. A man sitting behind me stuck his finger down my pant and forced his finger down my crack. I don't know what to do. I was never prepared for this. I didn't even know what this meant, so I just froze and let him. I think he was trying to find my hole and stick his finger at it because he kept pushing deeper and deeper down my pants. This was about 30 minutes. People would pass by and he pulls his hand out, but when the coast was clear, he would slowly try to do it again. It was 30 minutes of hell. Finally, my mom got up and asked to come with her to the concession stand to help her carry drinks. I was so relieved. When we came back, I begged my mom to switch seats. That's all I remember. I barely recall the visual parts of that night, but I still vividly remember how it felt and the sound of his voice. The strange man in my house in the middle of the night. I woke up to pee, something I rarely ever do, and went into the hallway, where I saw the silhouette of a man I did not recognize standing at the top of the steps, staring back at me. I'd like to say I screamed, but I just stood there. Thankfully, my father had also woken up, came out, and yelled at me to go back in my room and lock the door. The fact that someone we didn't know could just walk into our house in the middle of the night terrified me. It would be years before I realized if he was just burglaring us, he would have stayed downstairs. I hate to think about why he broke in that night. I was molested by a group of older kids when I was 4. They made me think it was just some fun game, and they got so far into my head that I was convinced that the entire thing was my fault for years, think it was entirely on me because I'd let it happen. That has to be the most disturbing memory that happened to me. It still makes me as uncomfortable now as it did when it happened. Was home alone once as a young kid. It was summer, so I was outside in my hammock reading Percy Jackson. We didn't have any close neighbors because we lived in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, I'm sitting there closed up in my hammock when I hear a car. Thinking it was my parents getting home, I popped my head out of the hammock and went to greet them. Turned out to be a white van with 2 middle-aged guys in it. I, being the dumb kid I was, said, "Hello." The guys were kind of shocked, and I then asked them if they wanted to talk to my parents, and I motioned to the cars behind our house. Now from the road you can't see, but we have 2 other cars parked behind our house that were our families, and they must have thought no one was home because there were no cars in the front. Anyway, I don't remember exactly what they said, but they made an excuse and jumped back in the car and zoomed away. Didn't realize how terrified I was till after they left. Never felt the same home alone ever again. When I was 13, I was at a neighborhood park waiting for a friend who never showed up. A man came out of his house across the street and stood on his porch and called out to me. The porch was deep and a bit shadowy, and I hung back in the street a ways, but I saw that he was cute. He started talking, telling me he was new in town from New York and other random bits of info. He told me he was 16 and that I was the prettiest girl he'd ever seen. I was young, 13, and very naive, but I just didn't believe anyone who'd lived in New York and had all the worldly experience he described wouldn't have seen someone prettier. I also didn't quite believe he was only 16. He hung back in the shadows by the door, and he looked young, but not that young. He kept asking me to come up on the porch and sit with him, and the more he'd talk and flatter me, the closer to the house I'd get. Something felt a little off, but I was also the child of an abusive mother and emotionally neglectful father, so I was starving for love and attention. And here was the handsome, worldly guy telling me I was funny, special, pretty, etc. I was fully on the sidewalk at this point, and we were talking and laughing, so I decided I'd just quit being a baby and join him on the porch. I started to climb the stairs, and I suddenly heard the distinctive sound of my dad's car. I turned around to see he had come down the street opposite and stopped in front of the house. He took one look at me and the house and told me to get in the car. On the drive home, he asked me what I was doing at that house, and I was silent. I couldn't get any words out. It was like my head suddenly cleared, and I understood how absolutely dangerous that situation could have been. He just looked at me and told me that he'd be sitting at home, when suddenly he just had a sense that he needed to go check on me. My dad had never done that before and never did it after. It wasn't until later that it registered for me that when I'd been on the stairs and turned to see my dad's car, I'd heard the door to the house shut. I'd glanced up briefly, and the guy was nowhere to be seen. I'm fully convinced my dad saved my life that day, and that if I'd gone in that house, I wouldn't have come out, or I wouldn't have come out the same. Back when I was in high school, my assistant principal had to walk me to my car to grab something from it that I forgot. He seemed totally fine. We were chatting and he told me to have a good afternoon. He shot and killed his wife and killed himself that same night. It bothers me that I didn't pick up on something being wrong. I couldn't have done or said anything, but it still occupies more headspace than I care to admit many years later. Watching my father die and not being old enough to help or understand what was happening. Then, the next day, being interviewed by the coroner to find out exactly where the hands were on the clock when Daddy fell down. I saw someone jump off this bridge somewhere in upstate New York when I was 4 or 5 years old. We were on a camping trip. I don't remember where. I just know it was anywhere between the cities of Albany and Syracuse. The bridge is quite a ways above the ground. Not sure how far, but far enough that it would be a damn miracle to survive. I made a big deal about it to my parents, and they thought it was just my imagination, which was a common thing for me to do, tell wild stories. The next day, my father noticed it was in the newspaper he was reading the next day. He was talking with my mom about it, but they never talked to me about it because they didn't want to freak me out, despite being an earshot of them without them knowing. I don't recall how I handled it, other than being a bit shocked and completely dumbfounded that people could kill themselves. I think it helped me understand our mortality at a young age in a rather morbid way. I wasn't able to ask my parents about it or bring it up for some reason, and I was an outspoken child. I don't believe it traumatized me in a negative way, but definitely makes me feel some sort of way every time I decide to think about it. Who was that guy? What made him want to jump? What was his rock bottom? What drove him to suicide? I'll never know, and that's the only thing that I ever think about, especially when I got older and understood emotions a lot better than a kid who was close to starting kindergarten. My brother was one of those kids that parents worry will kill them in their sleep. My parents put a reinforced door with outdoor locks on my room, and every night they made sure my door was locked. I was 10 and thought my parents were being overcautious. One time around 3 a.m. I hear my brother flipping out, glass breaking, furniture moving. screaming so loudly you couldn't even understand what he was saying. Keep in mind, this is completely unprovoked. He just woke up and decided to destroy the house. This wasn't the first time, but this time my dad screams for me to not come out and call 911, all while hearing the very distinctive sounds of flesh hitting flesh. Punching is a very distinctive sound. It was the police, threatening to have me taken by CPS if they didn't do something to protect me from him. So instead of arresting my brother and making him be responsible for his actions, they were threatening to take me away from my parents when they had begged them to take him. The 90s mentality was fix your kid, regardless of the fact sometimes that just wasn't possible or will hold you, parents, responsible. The scariest part was the officer taking me and putting me in the back of a cop car while my dad, all beat to hell, tried to stop them, and my completely untouched brother just stood there smiling. It wasn't mental illness. It was straight up evil that drove my brother. He enjoyed the chaos. He eventually committed a crime outside of our home, and it forced the state to do something. We lived 13 years with a terrorist in constant fear of him, and it was only when he became a threat to outsiders that police finally stopped treating my parents like the criminals. Yes, he's still exactly the same way. In and out of prison constantly, randomly shows up at the house as if I'd opened the door without a gun. My childhood was a mix of Disney adventures with Hostel or Saw interludes. Yes, I have CPTSD. Taking a shortcut through the park at dusk, no one around but this large dude ahead. The man turns his head and saw me, and then reduced his pace. I felt anxious but didn't really know how to react, so I kept my pace, and so we ended up walking in parallel. As I passed him by from the corner of my eye, I saw him slowly put on these black gloves, which even then I thought was weird because it wasn't a cold day. The man was now behind me, but keeping my pace, catching up with me, and I still didn't know what to do. At that point, I was about to panic. Two women pushing their kids in strollers came into view, and the man dropped back, and I sped out of the park. I was too embarrassed to bring up something that made me look weak to my family. A few weeks later, a child was abducted in our area. What is the strangest, creepiest thing that has happened to you that left you saying, "What the hell was that?" Went camping with school. Stayed in a fairly nice campsite in the woods. The very first night, about 6 of us shared a big tent and were all laughing and joking as kids do. Then, one of the lads suddenly says, "What the fuck is that?" with a genuine look of horror on his face. So we rush to his side of the tent and peer out into the darkness toward the big communal campfire, and I shit you not, all 6 of us saw what I can only describe as a pair of white legs, no upper half, walking around the campfire before vanishing. We were in shock for a while before we all collectively just laughed hysterically whilst crying inside. Still to this day, I have no idea what we saw. It genuinely looked like a pair of white trousers just walking around. On Christmas, I had a dream that an ex-boyfriend I hadn't spoken to in several years was holding my hand. When I woke up, I was laying on my back with my hand above the covers. I always sleep on my side under the blankets, and I could still feel his hand holding mine. It was like a cartoon, where the character falls as soon as they look down. I felt his hand holding mine as plain as day, as real as the bed beneath me. But the moment I looked, I couldn't feel it anymore. It creeped me out for a few days and I couldn't get over it, so I tried to get a hold of him. His social media was inactive, so I shot his mother a message. He had taken his life a week before, and I was in his note. I hadn't heard from him in years and hadn't been thinking of him for any particular reason. Had I not had that dream, I wouldn't have made it to his memorial or seen what he'd written me. Bittersweet, creepy, interesting. At the time, I never really thought much of it because of my age. When I was around 8 to 9 years old, we used to live in a semi-detached house where the stairs were by the left side of the house and the neighbor's home was to the right, important for later. Another important fact was that an old guy used to live there and unfortunately passed away. I made friends with the neighbor's kids because we realized we went to the same school. One day I was walking up the stairs whilst knocking my knuckles against the wall playfully like any child would. I heard someone knock back, and at the time I was young, so I assumed it was the neighbor's kid knocking from the other side. I knocked again and heard the wall knock back. It wasn't until I recalled the memory and floor plan that the neighbor's house wasn't aligned with the stairs. The other side of the wall I knocked on was plain land. This happened back in the mid-'80s. My sister's ex-boyfriend and I, we were friends. They were still on friendly terms as they shared a child. Were driving home from San Bernardino. We were traveling west on Interstate 10. It was around 8:30 p.m. or so. We both noticed a really bright light, looked sort of like flames, to our direct right. There were fields to our right. We felt a little rumble. Then we saw, both of us, although I was also driving so had to be careful, a missile or something literally fly up into the sky from the ground. We weren't drunk or high. We were just surprised. We saw other people looking over to the right as well from their cars. 2 cars actually pulled off the freeway to the side. I was scared shitless. I told him to put it on the news stations. I told him try KFWB. He did, and he was near tears. We seriously thought we were going to war or something. Finally, we put it on another station. We were still on the freeway, and we stopped on KISS. And they were actually talking about it, but didn't have any specific details on it. Maybe a minute's worth of talking about it. We finally got home and busted in the house, telling everyone what we saw. And I turned the TV to one of the main stations, hoping for a special report to break in. He went and turned on the stereo to the news station. Nothing. No reports other than the small snippet from KISS FM. We searched newspapers, watched news, listened to news for the next week. Nothing. We both absolutely saw this, as did other people on the freeway, but nothing was ever spoken about it after that. The time I visited a nursing home with my friend so she could go see her mom. We were on our way out when some old lady in a wheelchair gestured towards me and started calling me my mom's name. My mom's mom died in that nursing home, and it was likely one of her friends. And I look a lot like my mom, at least when she was my age, so I can see how she'd confuse us. I couldn't stop to talk to her because the nurses saw and told us we shouldn't. I had surgery recently. I remember having a dream while under anesthesia where I was lucid and knew that my dream body was not real and that my real body was on an operating table. In the dream, I was back in my apartment and my cat kept trying to jump up on me and I kept thinking, no, you can't jump on me because I'm actually on a table and you'll mess up the surgery. I have no memory of waking up during surgery and have no idea how I knew, but I remember feeling a lot of distress that my cat was going to mess up my surgery. It's left me with a really bad, weird, creepy feeling, even weeks later. My dad, my brother, and I were at a house with several outbuildings that my uncle had bought to fix up and sell. My uncle was showing us around. It was a very weird place. It had wainscoting over a door in the basement and a long tunnel running to the outside with metal teeth over the end. You could see sunlight through the tunnel. It was just so big enough for a small man to crawl through. On the main floor at the back was a room with a lock on the outside. The room's walls were covered in black plastic, no windows. The floor was painted blue with milk paint. I felt an immediate sense of foreboding and refused to stay in the room. My brother and I went and looked at the Quonset house that was one of the outbuildings. It must have been set up for a family member. Upon opening the door, we found the main room almost knee-deep in kids' toys. We walked towards the front where the kitchen was. There was no door, just a curtain. I immediately had an intrusive thought that told me that there was a family in there at a formica table with silver edges. The mother was cooking, and there was a man and 2 kids there. I completely felt that is what I would see. I could see that the table and kitchen were yellow. All of this in my head. I pulled the curtain, and of course, no one was there. But I had the kitchen correctly in my head. The entire layout was exactly what I thought it would be. My brother and I turned and left without speaking about it. About 10 years later, I brought it up to my brother about what I thought I'd see after opening the curtain. He said to me, "That's exactly what I thought I'd see too." Something bad happened at that house. I don't know what it was, but something bad happened. When I was in high school, my family and I lived in a loft above an insurance business downtown, and it was a smallish building. Small enough that there was only room for one apartment, so we were the only people living there. At the time, I would get up the earliest, so everything was pretty quiet aside from the usual car noises from outside. One Monday, I woke up to my alarm, and I thought I heard a jingling sound. I turned my alarm off and sat up in bed, listening for a few seconds before I heard it again. I couldn't think of an explanation. I didn't have anything with bells on it that I could think of. I looked under my bed and around my room to see if anything had fallen that would make a sound like that, but there was nothing. The setup of this apartment was weird. I had to walk through my little brother's room to get to my room, and so I walked through his room on my way out to the living room and kitchen. My brother was still sound asleep, and I didn't see any toys around that would jingle like that. Upon entering the living room, I immediately noticed that the laundry room door was open. Not wide open, but cracked open, enough to make it obvious. We always kept that door closed unless we were in there doing laundry. I looked around and didn't see anything out of place. When I got back from school, I asked my parents and brother if they had left the laundry room door open, and they claimed not to. On Tuesday, everything was normal, but Wednesday the same exact scenario happened again. I woke up and heard unexplained jingling, and found the laundry room door cracked open again. Fast forward about a year later. My mom had moved the stove for the first time since we lived there, and we found cat toys underneath. Cat toys with bells in them that jingled, just like what I had heard before. When we initially moved in, my mom had found what appeared to be cat litter on the floor in the laundry room, and she had even heard a cat meowing at one point and looked everywhere, only to find nothing, and assumed that it must have come from outside. After piecing all of this together, though, we couldn't help but wonder if we had a ghost cat from a previous tenant living with us, batting at the jingle toys and going into the laundry room to use the litter box. The door was open just enough for a cat to fit through. It never happened again after those 2 days, though. Weird. I was on a volunteer fire department, and we were called out to a single vehicle rollover. There were 2 occupants in the vehicle, a guy and a girl, boyfriend and girlfriend, and the girl was very much dead when we got there. We waited with the guy on the tailgate of the vehicle until the ambulance arrived and stabilized him for transport to hospital. While we were waiting, he explained that they were sitting side by side, cuddling as they drove and sharing Mike and Ike's between each other's lips while kissing. The next day, the fire department had a debriefing meeting to check in on another after such a stressful event. This one guy starts explaining a recurring dream he had where the girl who died in the crash was trying to get his attention to explain what had happened, how they had a candy between their lips kissing. He didn't even know what Mike and Ike's were, but kind of explained that they were like candy Tic Tacs that were longer and started with the letter M. When one of us suggested Mike and Ike's, he exclaimed, "That's it! That's what you were trying to tell me." This freaked the hell out of me. The guy was on tragic duty for this call and was easily more than 500 yards from the scene of the accident. There were only 3 firefighters at the actual scene, I being one of them. Because the accident was late in the evening, we didn't debrief immediately after because everyone needed their sleep. There was no way Buddy could have known this intimate detail of the crash. It was all unexplainable and easily the eeriest things that I've ever experienced. A guy fishing with a fully dressed outfitted dummy. It was in Luray, Virginia, along the Shenandoah River, a pretty isolated area. We were walking our dogs and passed 2 guys at river's edge, fishing. Not that unusual, until I realized that one of the guys was in reality a dummy or mannequin, fully dressed in a fishing outfit. Its arms were out, rigid, holding a fishing pole. I totally freaked out internally, but kept telling myself I must be imagining it. I didn't say anything to my husband because I didn't want to draw the attention of what might be an absolute lunatic. As soon as we got past them, my husband, the most level-headed guy in the world, looked at me and asked if I'd seen the guy fishing with a dummy. Cue internal screaming. Still creeps me out to this day. I wasn't a sick kid or anything, but I remember one time when I was oldest 6 years old and sleep on the couch with a bucket sick, and I had a very detailed dream, probably inspired by the Page Master movie, but I was in a really old library with my father. He was looking for a new sci-fi book, and I felt drawn to a section with old-fashioned leather-bound books. I pulled one from the shelf and flipped through it. I went to put it back, but the void where I had drawn it from was pure black and a small white light could be seen. I stared and watched as the white light came closer and formed a tiny human shape. As it walked forward, I remember specifically the sounds, a needle being dropped on a tile floor, followed by a phone book being dropped on a wooden floor. The needle echoed, but the book did not. As the form got closer, the noise got louder too. When it reached the edge of the shelf, it was the same height as the books. I remember being terrified of it, so I ran. There were adults around me, but they heard and saw nothing. I screamed for my dad, but couldn't find him. When I looked back at what I was running from, it was now hunched over and had its legs nearly curled up to its chest as it tried to fit inside the library and reach out to me. I couldn't hear my screaming or anything, but the repeated needle and phone book. Pretty sure as it reached out to me, I woke up, vomited, and the world kept spinning even though I was awake. Couldn't hear anything but those damn sounds. I used my pillow to try and drown it out till I fell back asleep. This memory is super clear and the sounds are insanely specific. I was walking my dog one day in the park. The park is pretty big, with a lake and a part where the path leads through the woods. Me being a dumbass, I forgot it was getting dark early, but I decided to continue walking. My dog is pretty big and protective, so I felt safe enough. She was walking loose ahead of me, her collar has red lights on them, when we turned the corner through the woods. It was getting darker and darker, and even though I know the park like the back pocket, I turned on the flashlight on my phone. Anyway, a few minutes go by, just silence. Sounds of my footsteps and the wind in the trees, when my dog suddenly started growling. I stopped. She's standing a few feet away, just a ring of red lights staring at the trees. I call her, and she's by my side in a second. I don't know why, but I dismissed it as dumb doggy behavior, like smelling a rabbit or whatever, and keep walking. Very stupid, I know. So we keep walking, dog by my side, my flashlight in front of me. We turn another corner, and my dog's growling again. This time, I freak out a little and look around me with the flashlight. Nothing. It was just a minute of walking before the path led us back into the park. I could make a run for it, but I had this weird feeling. So I took a few steps forward and saw someone standing a little away on the path, just standing there, like they just appeared out of nothing. It was weird, and I immediately felt nauseous. My dog starts full on barking, growling, back hair standing up. She's a very social dog, even with complete strangers, so this had to be bad. Her barking kind of shocked me into moving. The moment I grabbed her to turn around to make a run for it, the figure stepped forward. I never ran so hard. I ran all the way back to the little bridge that connected the neighborhood to the park. My dog was still with me, thank God. The moment I got home, I called the local police and asked them to check it out. They didn't take it that seriously because nothing bad happened, but they sent a car over. They found nobody, of course. I slept badly that night, and it took me a while to walk there again, even in daylight. I was 6 or 7, for some reason still sleeping in my parents' bed. Recently, my friend's older brother told me about Slender Man because this was the time where he started blowing up, and I couldn't sleep because I was excited for the next day because it was our yearly family vacation, and I looked over at the end of the bed and I swore someone was standing there. I tried to ignore it, but then I also saw someone leaning over my father on the other side of the bed and began bawling. Still have no clue what I saw or WTF was happening in general that night. Some guy tried to kidnap me at a McDonald's in the Hamburg train station. It totally sucked. I was trapped, sitting at this booth while this guy who sat across from me told me he was going to follow me to my train and take me away to marry him in Ghana. I was totally alone. No one was going to come. I tried to tell him to leave, gave him the cold shoulder, told him to fuck off, told him I had friends meeting me there. I was scared he was going to follow me, so I stayed sitting in the seat with his evil, creepy fucking face staring at me for what felt like forever. Luckily, a policewoman came into the McDonald's asking about a backpack left outside. I jumped up and pointed at him and told her that this man is threatening to follow and kidnap me. She brought over 2 giant police officer dudes to give him a talk, and I hightailed it to my train. The weird part was that I was the most scared telling the police on the guy than I was the whole time the guy was making threats. While I was on the train, I kept thinking, what the hell just happened? So we live in a really wooded part of Texas. This was around 11 p.m., and my mom was having a laughing fit in the living room over something she saw on the internet or talking on the phone with a friend. I don't remember. Point is, when she laughs really hard, she has a sort of hoo-hoo-hoo laugh, but like in a laughing tone. I can't describe. Imagine that noise, but you're laughing, lol. Well, I walk past the living room into the kitchen, and as I do, I start mocking her, hoo-hoo-hoo. She gets annoyed and tells me to go away and continues on. I grabbed my car keys to grab a charger or something from my car, turn on my phone's flashlight, and go around the house to my car. It's completely dark, no light other than mine and no noises. I could hear my mom laughing inside, but it was sort of muffled. When I fucking hear it, I was at the front of my car, about to reach for the door, when, clear as fucking day, dude, hoo-hoo-hoo, I froze. I didn't know what to fucking do. I know it wasn't an echo because I heard it literally behind the car a few feet away from me. I didn't know if I should run, scream, or try to see what it was. I jumped in the car as quick as I could and locked the doors. I waited for about 20 minutes and ran straight back inside. I told my mom and she just scoffed at me. I honestly don't know what the fuck that was. I'm convinced something made that noise. It sounded human. I don't know, it wasn't an animal. And living in the woods for so long, I know it wasn't an owl. No other animal around here makes a noise like that. What paranormal experience convinced you that ghosts are real? Never really believed and not sure if I still do, but there were some odd happenings at the movie theater I worked at in college. One theater in particular was super weird. Every time something malfunctioned or generally strange happened during the day, it was always in that one. But more importantly, I was cleaning it by myself one morning and it was completely empty, but heard a human-like groan 6 feet in front of me. Heard it again, same exact voice and sound, a few months later, but this time in the break room, and it was even louder and closer. Cut my break short and ran, lol. Then he did shit like slapped a popcorn scooper off the machine to the floor, and one time my table was shoved really hard while I was working at it. Nobody was around, and nothing could have fallen on it. Some events can be explained as logical happenings, but not those. Not sure what to think other than it's strange and might as well play along that it's a ghost, lol. Despite the occasional spookiness, the job was fun. It was only on very quiet, very slow days he'd make an appearance, but most days we were busy. It was always when you'd least expect him. I'd spend long late night shifts until 2 a.m. almost completely by myself in some halls and theaters, totally creeped and ready for a show, and I get nothing. It was always like in the mornings or afternoons, when I'm minding my business, he decides to groan at me. I was camping with my husband and his family at a small remote lake in our state. Our state, New Mexico, has always had many stories of paranormal activity just about everywhere. Well, on this camping trip, there were about 10 of us off the shore of the lake and one other group of people camping, maybe like 6 of them, at the next site over off the shore. It was nighttime, and both our group and the other were doing typical activities, making s'mores, having a few drinks, telling stories, when all of a sudden we all heard what sounded like a little girl yelling out for help. The other group of campers asked us if we had any children in the group. We didn't. Neither did they. But we were all positive we were hearing a little girl and decided to search the area we heard noises from together. Rather quickly, we found something. There was a field behind our campsites, and we all saw a very tall, pure white figure standing maybe 100 feet away from us in the field, making the noises. We all agreed that this thing looked maybe 6 feet tall, skinny, and white as can be. Everyone got quiet, but we were all together still and made our way closer to investigate. Whatever it was that we saw started backing off as we got closer until it disappeared beyond some trees. Every single person in both campsites was freaked out by this, and that night while we tried to sleep, we continued to hear those little girl calling for help sounds. It gives me chills to think back on this. Around 1 p.m., me and my brother were at a grocery store and we bumped into one of his friends from high school. They greeted each other and made some small talk. I also said hi since we were schoolmates. That night, around 8 p.m., my brother received a call that his friend, who was in a coma for 12 hours, just died. He thought he was receiving a prank call since we just met the guy 7 hours earlier. The day my grandpa died, my grandma asked me to stay the night because she didn't want to be alone. It was a very hard day for everyone, especially her. I didn't have much knowledge of ghosts or paranormal because I was 13, and I never got into that stuff until later. I go in the guest bedroom and get ready for bed. As I'm laying down trying to sleep, I get sad thinking about the day we just had and how much I was going to miss him. I said a prayer and ended it with, "I love you, Papa. Good night." 1 second later, I hear his distinct voice say, "Good night." I leap out of bed and run into the living room, turn on the lights and TV, and just sat there trying to figure out what just happened. A few hours later, my grandma came out and I told her what happened. She started to cry and sat with me the rest of the night. I was en route home from a 12-day vacation, driving a pickup pulling a fifth-wheel RV. It was around 11 p.m. on a Saturday night in late July, and I was about 2 hours from home, trying to make it home yet that night. I was in a very rural area, where there was almost no one living on about a 20-mile stretch of road. There was only one combination gas station, tavern, motel on here, and it's heavily wooded on both sides. It is county maintained and fenced at the tree line. The shallow ditches had been mowed and the grass was about 6 inches high. I only saw a couple of cars on this whole stretch of road. I was going only about 50 miles per hour because it is heavily populated with deer. I saw movement ahead, so I immediately slowed more. As I passed, I saw it was a young woman, tall, fit, brunette, wearing a cropped top, pleated skirt, and stockings, walking with the traffic just off of the shoulder. I immediately thought car trouble, though I had not passed a disabled car, or fight with boyfriend or driver and was put out. I pulled to the side of the road, hit the emergency flashers, and grabbed the flashlight to check on her. When I got to the rear of the camper, there was no one. I looked around for her. There was no way she could have reached the back of the RV before I did, so she could not have been hiding there. She could not have hid in the ditches as the grass was too short. She could not have made it to and over the fence without a light in a little time it took me to get to the rear of the RV. I looked where she had been walking, and I saw no sign that the dew on the grass had been disturbed. I drove the rest of the way home with the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. When I stayed at my aunt's house for a night, I slept in a room that had all the furniture of my great-grandmother who passed away a few years prior, including the couch I slept on. At night, I woke up to the room being freezing cold, despite no opened windows, doors, and the heating unit of the house working very well. Suddenly, I heard loud noises in the dark, and when I turned on the light, I saw my great-grandma's old sewing machine working on its own before it very slowly stopped and seized movements of its compartments completely, after which I calmed down, feeling cozy, and fell back asleep. To this day, my aunt and parents don't believe me. I was in a minor car accident, T-boned at an intersection. About 100 meters before I hit the intersection, I felt a hand on my shoulder and a male tell me to slow down. I was already a few kilometers under the speed limit doing 55 in a 60 zone. I was in the car with my then 3.5-year-old daughter. She was on the passenger side in the rear and would not have been able to touch me through her restraints. Other car hit me at high speed in the front passenger side. If I'd been going any faster, my daughter would have taken the impact and not survived. A few days later, my very healthy and uninjured daughter was battling in her bedroom. I went to check on her, and she told me she was just talking to Grandpa K. I asked where he was, and she pointed to the corner of her room. I figured it was just her imagination and walked away. About a week after that, she was at my mom's house and said, not verbatim, "Hey Grandma, Sonny says to say hi. He is sorry he left, but he's looking after Mom for you." Grandpa K is Mom's dad. He died before I was born, and Mom never really mentioned him or her mom, also dead before I was born when I was growing up. Grandpa K's nickname was Sonny. I didn't even know that until that moment. My boyfriend and I were in our house eating dinner. Our front door was open and the screen door was closed. We heard the screen doors swing open and slam shut. We both went to the living room, then out onto the front porch. As soon as we went outside, we were hit by a thick, cloying, floral, sweet smell. It smelled like funeral flowers, if you've ever smelled that scent before, just overwhelmingly strong and concentrated right in front of our house. We both felt kind of creeped out, so we went back into the house and to our bedroom. I sat on the edge of our bed, which faced the hallway, and one of our dogs came and hopped onto my lap. My boyfriend and I were speculating about what the door slamming and the smell was all about. I was looking straight ahead into the hall during a lull in the conversation, and I saw a dark shadow pass down the hall, go past our bedroom door, and into another room at the end of the hall. It was just tall, vaguely human-shaped and solid black, like the area where it was somehow just had all the light sucked out of it, and you couldn't see through it. Our dog saw it too. He went nuts, barking and growling and whining. For some reason, that scared me more than anything, that he saw it too. I started crying and said I wanted to leave the house, so we got our dogs in the car and left. We were having plumbing problems anyway, so we ended up just staying in a hotel room that night. When we came back the next day, things seemed totally normal, and nothing like that has happened since. Definitely one of the spookiest things I've ever experienced. I was at a friend's place, a very old wooden high-set house. Previous to this, he told me that it was haunted. Drawers would open and close, cupboards would open and slam shut, etc., etc. I called bullshit, as I'd never experienced this myself, until one night, after playing WoW for too many hours and eating too much pizza, I decided to sleep in his lounge room, as he had a futon. I heard shoes walking from right to left, slowly. They were ladies' shoes, much like the traditional witches' shoes, with the big single brass buckle on the front. They walked slowly from right to left into the kitchen, paced around, and walked back from left to right. I can still hear the steps to this day. They were heavy. There was also a scuff like the heel hit too low before the foot was placed down every other step. There were only the two of us in the house, and he was asleep in his room. I shat bricks and told him the next day. He said he heard it as well, and it's common. A few weeks later, he said that all the doors and drawers were opening and slamming shut, like something was losing its mind in the kitchen. After that, a mirror flew off the wall in the second bathroom and shattered on the floor, and everything immediately fell deadly silent. He never had any issues after that mirror smashed on the floor. This is my mother's story, and it's more about communicating with the deceased rather than seeing. So she's at work one day, office job, and she needs to make a phone call to pay an invoice or something. So she calls the company and starts speaking to a man. She suddenly gets the urge to interrupt him and say, "Sorry, but you have put the wallpaper up in your bathroom yet?" The guy hangs up immediately. She's feeling a bit weird about it until he calls back and tells her that his wife recently passed away unexpectedly. Prior to her death, she had been bugging him to finish the wallpaper in the bathroom. It really shocked both of them, but she felt like he was happy to get the message, even if it was another nag. Used to have a delivery route, third shift. Part of my route had me passing through a national forest. The first few weeks going through this forest had the hairs on my arms standing up. It was in the first week that one day I stopped to get gas at the town just before going into the forest. I never walked away from the car, used my card to pump blah blah. But as soon as I get to the forest, I feel like something is in the car with me, in the back seat. I didn't see anything though, the rearview mirror, and I was petrified of turning around, but I knew what it looked like all the same. To sum it up, an old lady with a face similar to a scream mask with the long, stringy gray hair. After a few weeks, I came to peace with whatever the fuck is guarding the forest. Basically told it that I respect the forest, I'm not here to tear things up, litter, whatever. Months later, I'm being sent off to other areas to fill in. I'm friends with the guy that took over my route, and one night we're both talking before the routes were set out to load up, and I asked him if anything had ever joined him on the route. He knew exactly what I was talking about, knew it was the national forest, something in the back seat, only his was some jackal-headed creature, not an old lady. Later, I asked someone else that used to have the route if they had seen strange things, again in the forest. It got to be amusing, since if I filled in on that route or anything, I never had problems anymore on that stretch. I used to see other weird things out there though, mostly weird lights. One night, I thought there was a police car somewhere until I realized the forest was too dense in this area for a car to be in there. There were weird flashing blue lights. There's camping areas out there, but not on that main road. I usually don't discuss this much because people try to explain things away, but they weren't there. I saw what I saw. When I was in college and studying at home, I remember needing to find a particular old 17th century play called The Alchemist by Ben Jonson. Me being poor and stupid, I didn't buy the class textbook, so I had to find it on my own. I was at my desk, and behind me was a walk-in closet which I used as a library as I collected old and rare books. I remember thinking that I saw the play in an old anthology of literature that I owned, and quickly pushed that out of my mind, as I thought it would take too much effort for text that was surely available on Project Gutenberg online. I heard a loud thump behind me. I turned around in my chair and walked into the closet, and on the floor was a book turned open with the pages facing up. You have to understand, for this to truly sink in, that my closet was lined with shelves that extended far enough back that no part of my books were hanging over the edge. I was meticulous and careful with them as some were relics. I looked at the book in disbelief, and when I saw that it was the anthology of literature I was thinking of, and not only that, but the header of the page showed it was the page of the play The Alchemist, I knew this was something truly out of the ordinary and unexplainable. I have more experiences in this house, but this one will remain for me as irrefutable proof that something intelligent that understood my inner thoughts caused that to happen. In the same house, on the day my father died, my grandma also tells a story of how pictures in the house were flying off the walls at her. My dad hated her guts, and she's always been an honest person. I don't know if I'd call what happened to me an experience with a ghost necessarily, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Back in college, I was walking through a historical district of my city. It was a double date, me, my best bud, and 2 girls. It was like 9 p.m. and we were strolling. In the district, there's an old historic hotel that was built in the early 1800s. Me and my bud were leading the way, and the girls were talking with each other. I looked up at the second floor of the hotel that had an open balcony or hallway and saw this shadowy figure that was the perfect shape of a man standing there looking down at us. I could make out the shape of a head, shoulders, and arms. In that instant, I pointed at it out to my bud and told him we should scare the girls. I think I had assumed it was a shadow or of a person against some kind of light, but when they looked up, they said, "What are you talking about? There's nothing there." I turned and it was gone. I realized that it was way too dark and perfect of a shape to have been a person's shadow. Also, it didn't make sense because it was night and there was no light facing the direction that would have made that a possibility. There also wasn't anyone up there and on the ground near us. Didn't hear a sound of a door open or close either. Me and my bud were the ones who ended up spooked that night. I googled the hotel after and found out that it is a famously haunted location. There have been a few ghost hunting shows that have been there. Apparently the ghosts are friendly though. My granddad passed away in 2018 and I was visiting my nan's house on the 1-year anniversary of his death. In the middle of the night I woke up facing towards the wall and I saw a figure kneeling down by the edge of the bed which looked exactly like him. I completely froze after I saw him. About 2 seconds later, the figure stood up and walked out the door. His passing was the first time I'd experienced losing someone close to me, so he was probably just making sure I was doing okay. To this day, I'm not 100% sure what happened, but it stuck with me. My grandmother passed away from cancer 2 years before I was born, and my grandfather had a room where he kept all her things such as jewelry, pictures, her china, and crystal collection, etc. I moved abroad at quite a young age, but would stay with my grandfather when we visited, and my brother and I would always be given her room to sleep in during our visit. It's hard to explain really, but I always felt there was something lightly off in that room. I didn't mind sleeping there, but also I didn't hang out in that room much during the day, even when I was much younger. Before we moved abroad to the room wasn't one I would play in. I always played in the room directly next to it. Fast forward to when I was 10 years old and visiting my grandpa, staying in the room as normal. The room was super dark at night, as my grandpa has these super blackout blinds and no light gets in. I woke up in the middle of the night and I could see this floating figure at the end of my bed. What I saw I can only describe as this very white glowing thing. As I said, there was no light in that room at night, but this thing was a bright white light. It looked like it was draped in this white see-through stuff which floated as if the wind was blowing inside the room. It just stood there for a moment. It wasn't terrifying looking at all. The thing, it was almost calming. For a 10-year-old to see something like that did freak me out, and I hid under the covers until I fell asleep. I still think about this all the time. Like I said, I don't know what it is I saw. I like to think it was my grandmother, since it was her room, but who knows? I've never been able to really rationalize what I saw. I haven't slept or spent more than 5 minutes in that room ever since. It's been 17 years. What's the scariest experience you've ever had at a gas station or rest stop? Not safe for work. Twice I've had super bad vibes pulling into a gas station. A while ago, I had an early flight leaving at 6 a.m., so I was driving to the off-airport parking and was very low on gas. I pulled into a gas station close to the airport around 4 a.m. The station was poorly lit, and I noticed there were 2 guys sitting outside drinking, and a third guy came out, but I was the only one at the pumps. When the third guy started walking to my car, I realized how vulnerable I was. I drove away immediately without getting gas. Just last week, I was returning a rental car to an Enterprise location in Philadelphia and needed to top up the gas tank. The only gas station the Waze app would show us close by was a Getty. When we pulled up to the station, my eyes went wide. Every single pump was vandalized, broken or missing panels or signs, broken glass all over the parking lot. All of the doors were shuttered except for one lone door and a weak, open light. We drove right through without stopping and just returned the car without filling the tank. Working at a gas station, this lady came in through the front door and said she was having a problem out at the pumps. She'd clicked the lever that let the nozzle keep pumping gas, but then somehow managed to pull the nozzle out of her car's receptacle. Not knowing what to do, she walked to the store and told me about it. I thought she had just spilled a little gas on the pad, but no. She'd left the nozzle on the ground, spilling gallons of fuel onto the pad. By the time I got out there, it was a pool of flammable liquid. Holy shit. Shut down the pumps, evacuate the area, call the fire department. No, ma'am. Don't get into your car and drive away. Don't touch anything. The fire department showed up and said, "Wow, we've never seen anything this bad." Fortunately, the gas station didn't blow up. It took a few hours to clean up the mess in the middle of an Arizona summer in 100-degree heat. I typically team drive, so we're rolling basically all the time. My co-driver had a death in the family and took like a week off, so I was solo driving, which means I had to stop every night to sleep. I was coming back to Arizona from Massachusetts and stopped for the night at this sketch little truck stop on I-40 at the AZ-New Mexico border. I had dinner and then got in the bunk to sleep. Now, most trucks have a curtain between the cab and the sleeper berth, plus curtains that wrap around the inside of the cab, windshield, and side windows. With the idea being if you're sleeping while your co-driver is driving, you close the sleeper curtain. If you're parked and sleeping, you close the cab curtains. That gives you more space. So, cab curtains closed, sleeper curtains open. I hit the bunk. Truck is idling for the AC. Some kind of noise wakes me up after being asleep for 4 or 5 hours. I'm waking up a bit disoriented as I'm usually team driving. As I'm waking up, I see flashing red lights in the cab, and I can hear the click, 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 click of my hazard lights. They're on. I know I hadn't left them on. Kind of freaked out as I realized only one way they could be on. Someone pushed the switch, and it wasn't me. I jump up and grab what I keep for protection in the truck. I look into the cab. Sure enough, hazards are on. Then I notice that my GPS unit is missing off the dash. Shit. Someone has been in my truck while I've been sleeping. I move up into the driver's seat and pull the curtain back, peering outside, expecting to see some scumbag running off with my GPS and whatever else. Everything seems quiet, but it's pretty dark. I open the curtains more, turn on my headlights, and get a better look around. I see nothing. Shit, I think they're gone. My $500 truck GPS is gone. Probably other stuff is gone. I think to check the doors, they're both locked. What the? How could that be? I look down and see my GPS unit hanging by the power cord. The suction cup came loose. The GPS fell off the dash and hit the hazard light button on the way down. Son of a bitch. What are the chances? I didn't sleep very well the rest of that night. Kind of funny now, but it scared me pretty good that night. I like team driving better. 20 years ago, I worked at a marina gas dock. Guy comes in to get his boat filled. What no one knew was that the guys who had just finished fixing his boat hadn't properly reconnected up his gas lines. So, as my coworker was pumping gas into his boat, the gas isn't going into his fuel tank, but was instead flowing into his bilge. Then the bilge pump automatically kicked in to deal with the rising water level inside the boat. Had that pump sparked, the fireball would have burned us all to dust. Instead, it just created a bit of an ecological nightmare, as all the gas that we'd pumped into the boat got pumped out into the lake. This is probably the reverse of what people expect to read here. It's not like it's a spooky, horrifying experience, just my scariest experience. Some friends and I wanted some snacks from the corner store or gas station. I was sitting in the back right seat, so I pulled up near the front and dropped me off in and out. So, anyways, I grab all the snacks and come back out and enter back into the car. And while entering, I can't see my friends in the front. Anyways, I continue to enter the car and sit down, look to my left, and there's a little kid just sitting there staring at me. I was the stranger. I entered the exact same car, color, model, where it dropped me off like 1 minute earlier, but it was not my friend's vehicle. All I could think is that some dad is about to explode on me. So I quickly get out of the vehicle and spot my friends parked just ahead in a parking spot. Now and quickly head over and recount what just happened. So that may have been my scariest experience and that kid's scariest experience. We were driving to Virginia in the early 90s. It was about midnight and my father pulled into a rest stop as my mother needed to use the bathroom. He dropped her off in front and went to park. I made my way inside and stopped. A huge man had my tiny mother over his shoulder and was calmly walking to the other exit. My mother did not make a sound. I will never forget the look on her face, fear and shock mixed together. I screamed so loud. My father was just coming in. He saw what was happening and ran after the man. The dude put my mother down and just walked out of the building. We sat in the car waiting for the police to arrive. My mother said he grabbed her soon after she walked in. He was inside the ladies' room, apparently waiting for a victim. The lights were off when my mom walked in. We spent the night at a nearby motel. My parents went to the police station in the morning so my mom would look through pictures to identify him. She didn't recognize anyone. We had a new rule in the family. Nobody could go to a rest stop bathroom without at least one family member with them. When I was 18, I went to a gas station at 4 a.m. to grab a late snack. I grab a hot dog and some chips. I get into my car, turn the music on, and start enjoying my food in the parking lot. My window is partially down because the temperature was nice outside and it let in a cool breeze. Out of nowhere, this guy comes over and taps on the window. I nearly drop my food and immediately lock the door before he taps again. I move to the driver's side window down a little further and ask him what's going on. "Get out of the car, man." "Excuse me?" "Get out of the car. I'm taking this car." He taps on the window again, but this time I notice he's tapping on the glass with a knife. I glance around and see there is no other cars around. I'm terrified of the idea of getting out of the relative safety of my vehicle, and who's to say this guy wouldn't stab me for the hell of it on top of taking my car. I notice he's standing a little back, maybe trying to act his best at being nonchalant and not draw attention in case the clerk sees him or something. "Alright man, give me a second," I reply, moving to unbuckle my seatbelt. At the same time I use my other hand to roll the window up. It was luckily an automatic. It took the guy a second to realize what I was doing, and he tried to jab the knife through the crack, but ended up making a scratch along the glass. He started shaking the door handle, but of course, that's a no-go. I put the car in reverse and pull out with him still shouting at me, waving his knife. He chases me for a second, before giving up. I can see the clerk inside on the phone as I drive away, and I flip this knife-wielding prick the bird. I call the police after getting home, and they take a statement. Officer basically tells me they got a call from the gas station about it earlier as well, but the guy had obviously ran off. But with both of our statements, they got a good description of him. Never heard anything about it again, but it was one of the most tense experiences of my life. TLDR. The guy attempted to carjack me with a knife when my window was down, rolled up my window and drove away instead. When I was about 7 or so, I got really sick and ended up staying in the hospital for a day or so. When I finally started feeling better, my dad was allowed to take me home, so he picked me up that night. It was probably just around midnight, and on the way home we stopped at a gas station. While I sat in the truck waiting for my dad to return, some guy opened the driver's side door and got in. I'm pretty sure he was about to steal the truck until he noticed me sitting there. He panicked and said something like, I was just checking the time, then got out and left. About 2 minutes later, my dad got back and life was good. For whatever reason, I didn't mention what had happened to him until years later, but looking back, I could have easily been kidnapped or something, which is horrifying. Gas station in Poway, California in 2009, I witnessed an attempted murder. I was sitting in my truck with the lights off late at night. I saw a teenager hit another teenager in the head with what looked like a chunk of rebar. Kid went down and the other kid ran away. Somebody called 911. Kid was unconscious and bleeding. Ambulance came for the kid. I gave a description to the cops. They found the kid in a garage a block away. I identified him from the back of the police cruiser while the cops had him pressed against the wall. I had to give a statement of what I witnessed at the juvenile court in San Diego. I pulled over to pee at a rest stop in northern British Columbia, which turned out to have out-of-order signs and locked doors. So I ran around the corner to pee, was just finishing when I looked up, and not more than 20 feet from me was a bear walking directly toward me. Not running, just ambling right at me. I started backing toward my car, afraid to run. It stopped to sniff my pee, but was still less than 10 feet away when I got to my car. As I started the car, it walked right up to the driver's side door and looked in at me. If I hadn't just pissed, I know I would have had wet myself, but holy shit was I scared. Not my story, but a friend of mine's. His family was on the road heading to Florida when they stopped at a gas station in Georgia. He really needed to take a dump, so his family waited in the car. As he was doing his business, the door to the bathroom opens and he sees a pair of feet walk into the stall next to him. A few seconds go by before he hears the sounds of thunderous farts and the sound of thumps into the water. He begins to laugh as hard as he can without making a sound, letting a small laugh out. The dude next to him perks up. He starts banging on the walls. The pooper says, "Someone in there?" My friend stays quiet while still laughing. The pooper stands up, not even bothering to pull his pants up, The pooper starts banging on the door to my friend's stall. He desperately tries to keep the door shut. The pooper says, "I'll beat the shit out of you," ironically. This moment, my friend is now actually scared and fearing for his life. Suddenly, the pooper stops banging on the door, walking over to his stall and wipes his ass. The pooper then storms out of the bathroom. My friend still frozen in fear. My friend then waited in the stall for a few minutes, thinking that the pooper would be waiting for him outside the bathroom. After 5 minutes or so, my friend runs out of the gas station and into the family's car. He actually didn't talk about what happened until his family got to the hotel in Florida. The way he was telling the story still makes me laugh out loud to this day. This dude honestly thought a stranger was going to beat him up from the sound of his rancid shit. One time I was traveling, and I had to stop for gas in the middle of nowhere, Oregon. I got off my truck to pump my gas when some sketchy-looking guy starts to get close. I try not to make eye contact and go about putting gas because it's literally in the middle of nowhere, and it was really late at night. He keeps walking towards me and gets my attention. "Sir," he says from a couple feet away. I turn around and we lock eyes. I'm ready to get attacked. "Sir, you can't pour your own gas here. This is Oregon." Fucking shit myself. Moral of the story, if you're driving through Oregon, please remember not to pump your own gas. I don't know if the laws have changed since then, but damn, it scared the crap out of me. My first and only time I had to do number 2 at a rest stop along I-40 headed to Knoxville. I patiently washed my hands until everyone was gone and then went to the stall. There was 3, 1 handicap and 2 regular, so I chose the regular situated in the middle. I hear someone walk in as I'm doing my stuff, and I see feet at my stall door. I noticed there was no lock on any doors when I went in, but they still shut. It was tense, but then my door slowly opened, and a man was standing there looking at me. I didn't really have a plan, and he was just watching me, so I said, "This one's occupied, I think." Then he just turned away and left the bathroom. My door was left wide open. I was freaked out. Driving from Evanston, Wyoming in a brand new F-250, towing a brand new 52-foot enclosed fifth wheel with a very expensive race car and parts, tools, etc., headed to Austin, Texas. Didn't really have a plan for the night. Figured I'd pull into a hotel when I got tired, but wanted to get through Denver ASAP and just kept going. Stopped for gas in Trinidad, Colorado at about 10:30 p.m. and was immediately on edge as soon as I got out of the truck. Did my stretch and walked to the pump and could feel eyes on me. Not the normal paranoia or the exhaustion of driving. It was the, I probably shouldn't be here right now, I need to GTFO feeling. Sure enough, as soon as I get the pump going, a mid-late 20s kind of rough-looking woman walks up and asks if I can get her a coffee. Says the guy kicked her out of the store for putting it in a water cup. She's clearly done more drugs than I have. I said sure, in a minute. She goes and sits down on a small retaining wall on the edge of the parking lot about 50 feet away, and I see her wave across the street. There's a shitty motel opposite the gas station, and 4 guys walk out of her room and head over to where she's sitting. Fuck. I'm about to get jacked, and I have $500,000 easy sitting here for these guys. For some reason, the gas is pumping so slow. In the 2 to 3 minutes I was standing there, it barely put in 5 gallons, but that was enough for me. I turn it off and put it back, and they all stand up. Woman starts walking over and asks about the coffee. I said the pump isn't working, I'm going to go to the next one, sorry. As I'm getting in the truck, one of the guys walks out into the road and kneels down to tie his shoe, it looks like. I'm like, fuck, here we go. Put it in gear, and I start moving, headed right for the guy. I'm in a 60-foot long rig. I can't just flip a bitch and turn around. My headlights sweep him, and he stands up and has something in his hand. It's a Gatorade bottle. He's like 15 and covers his eyes and runs over to the side of the road. I look over at the other kids, they're like 13 or 14, and it's their older sister or something. I laugh and drive off to the next station thinking how dumb I am. I end up driving straight through to Texas, though hopped up on adrenaline and beef jerky, 24 hours straight. Here's the creepiest. I was driving through the Midwest, going up to go visit Mount Rushmore. I was taking minor highways most of the way because I enjoy scenic drives, but I started running low on gas in western Nebraska. I drove with my gas light on for about another 20 miles by nothing but empty fields when I finally see a sign for a town, Palisade. I turn in and see probably the most podunk town I've ever seen, and I live in the country. Seriously, there was not a single car on the road and only a couple parked around randomly. I pull into a small, single-pump gas station. and noticed that there was no credit card input for the pump. No big deal, I thought. So I turned and tried to go to the small service shack that was by it, but the door was locked and the lights were out. I looked through the window and the shack was completely empty, like it had been abandoned. I got in my car to try my luck going to the next town, but my wife told me she needed to use the restroom. So I drove down Main Street, past boarded up windows and empty stores, and parked at the local post office. It was closed. I was 30 minutes too late. So I started to tell her that there was absolutely nothing open in this town when I saw a door that consisted of plywood instead of glass on a shop that had a busted window open and a couple people walk out carrying a bag. So we walked over, while being stared at the whole time by the people who came out, and pulled open the plywood door and entered a narrow, extremely dark, dirty, disorganized, practically unstocked country store, which employed a single worker at the front who was a bigger, burly guy wearing a greasy set of overalls and a trucker hat. It's a little hard to describe, but he seriously looked straight out of a horror movie. I asked the guy behind the counter if there was a restroom that we could use, but he either had trouble hearing or trouble understanding, so I repeated myself louder and slower, twice. Finally, he heard or understood and told me in the thickest country accent possible that it was in the back. He then repeated himself, giving me extremely detailed directions on how to get to it when I could practically see it from where I was standing. He then proceeded to repeat himself a third time, going into excruciating detail on the perils I may face in going to the bathroom, such as a low toilet paper or boxes in the way. I finally thanked him and walked to the back, and sure enough, there were dirty, dusty boxes of empty, used cleaning supplies strewn about everywhere that we had to step around before we got to the door. I opened it, and the sight made a truck-stop bathroom look like a palace. Luckily, my wife did not notice the half-dozen roaches scurry off, probably because the whole place was so dark. But she did notice the mold all over the walls, the puddle of an unknown substance on the floor, and the 50 or so empty toilet paper rolls strewn about. I asked her if she was okay, and she hesitantly told me that she would be fine and that she really had to go. I started walking around the store while constantly being silently stared at by the guy in the front. I grabbed a bottle of water to buy. I always buy something if I'm going to use the restroom at a place, but my wife finally came out of the restroom. When I went to the front to pay for it, he finally asked me if I found the bathroom okay. I told him that we did, paid for the bottle of water, and left with him staring at us the entire time. As we walked out, there were a few people across the street having a conversation, but immediately stopped and stared at us, so I ignored them best I could, got in the car, and started driving off. But I noticed the car parked at one pump gas station as I passed it, fueling. I did not care though. I got out of that town before it went full Twilight Zone and was able to make it to the next town before I ran completely out. What's the most creepiest thing you've seen that you weren't supposed to see? Not safe for work. Watched a gangland show, saw an interesting tattoo and the location that would identify someone as having been in a particular gang and served time, thought nothing of it. Literally the next Monday, I'm offloading equipment for a job, and as I pass a piece of gear to one of the new freelancers, I see the exact tattoo in the exact place in the show. He sees me recognize what it is, and for a very short, very chill moment, we pause. Then I grab the next piece of gear and decide to stop watching gangland shows. On my way home, I was looking at a busy street from the subway platform I was on, and I saw this guy that everyone knew as a scammer in the neighborhood. He'd throw himself in front of cars for money, but that day he threw himself in front of a real nice car, and it struck him really hard. He flew into the four-way intersection, clearly shocked by the pain, and his head got crushed under a truck passing by that didn't slow down in time. It looked like a watermelon exploding. It's crazy seeing a full-on human who has existed for decades just stop existing in a few seconds. When I was growing up, my mom and dad were shopping for a new house. We went to a new construction neighborhood to take a look. There was a model that my mom liked, and the sales lady said there was one being built down the street. It was about 50% done, but we can take a look to get an idea of the space. So we all hopped in the sales lady's car and went to go look. We got in the house, and she started to show us around. We went upstairs, and in the second floor bedroom, there was a guy fully nude and furiously masturbating away. I'm 100% sure he heard us coming as the house was empty, and our voices were slightly echoing as we moved around. My mom screamed. The sales lady screamed. My dad said, "What the F?" I was just hysterically laughing. The guy grabbed his clothing and just ran past us and out the house. I was 8 and watched my friend's dad beating the shit out of him from my treehouse. Looking back, it's no wonder he was the class clown. People loved him at school. When I was 15, me and a buddy were hiking along the Merced River to our fishing spot when we were stopped on the path by 3 guys with ball caps and bandanas covering their faces and holding shotguns. They told us to turn around and go back, which we did without question. It was very strange, since we'd been down there dozens of times and had never seen them before or after this. Found out a few months after that there was a clampers rally happening on the property of a guy who lived down there, and they were guards. A few years ago, the wife and I were searching for our first home. I was in the basement of one of the places that we were looking at and somehow noticed a light switch that seemed out of place. I was flicking the switch as my wife and agent came down the stairs. My agent noticed a bit of light coming from underneath the drywall framing the stairs. With a little further inspection, I found a very tiny passage between the foundation wall and the backside of the stairs. Said passage opened up into an undisclosed renovation that was a sub-basement room that was completely rubberized with an industrial hose and shower head. Walls, ceilings, and flooring were all rubber. It was 100% a secret murder room. My agent called the cops, and 48 hours later, the listing was removed and the home had police tape around it. A few years ago, I still lived in my parents' house. It was about 11 p.m. and our dog started barking viciously. The dog is only able to move around in the backyard, and normally he would bark at cats in the front yard. But something about his bark was different, so I walked to the window to see what was going on. I looked out and saw a man looking through the same window. We both froze, and after a few seconds, he ran off. A few weeks later, when we came home after work, all their electronics and expensive stuff was gone. I didn't see it so much as heard it. I was the first appointment of the morning at my dermatologist's office and was sitting in the corner out of view of the receptionist's desk. The doctor came up to her behind the counter and started reaming her out, cussing, etc. about some situation I couldn't understand, but he was actually yelling and super nasty. Then not 10 seconds later, he opens the door and comes out doing a jig and whistling and all, doody-doody-doody, all shucks. Good morning, Miss Sanibel, doody-doody-doo, like he usually did. I had whiplash from the 180. I stopped seeing him because the transformation was seriously scary. As a kid, I was walking through the woods when on holiday. I was only following the river up and down so I couldn't get lost. I saw a tarpaulin, through the trees and thought I would go check it out. As I got close, someone I couldn't see said, "Turn around and keep walking," which, unsurprisingly, I did, at a run. When walking back along the river the next day, the tarp was gone. My uncle was babysitting me when I was about 9, and so I went to work with him for the day. He was a landlord for some buildings in a city at the time and got complaints that an elderly woman hadn't been seen in a few days from the neighbors. She was on the ground floor, and I think the door may have been locked from the inside with a chain or something, but he had me climb in through the window to open the front door for him. My naturally curious self crawled through the window, and instead of going straight for the front door, I followed an awful smell towards the bedroom and found this lady face up on the ground dead. The place was a mess, so I didn't immediately associate the bad smell with death, but I bolted to the front door and watched them take her away in the ambulance. I don't know any legal answers here, and I never really talked about it. Weird day. Okay, I don't talk about this ever, but I'm just going to go ahead and say mine. My neighbor's suicide. I was only like 9, and it was, I've been told, death by shotgun to the face. I say I've been told because my mind has blocked most of it out. I can remember walking up the steps and opening the door, and then nothing. The closest thing I can remember after that was my mom holding me and rocking back and forth. I can also remember the smell. Not sure if it's the smell I smelled that day, but sometimes when the memory of walking up those steps is brought to mind, I get a faint smell in my nose. It's almost like the smell of cut meat and blood and pine wood. I was put into therapy for a while after it, but I can't remember much of that besides playing games. In my late teens, my therapist tried to get me to remember what I blocked out. It didn't work, and I decided that I couldn't remember for the simple fact that I wasn't supposed to see it, which is why I never spoke of it. Even my friends I grew up with don't know about it. I was sitting in the back seat on a bus and saw a man jerk off to a woman who was sitting a few spots in front of him. It was real nasty. He jizzed in an empty cup and threw it away in the small trash can on the bus. I was 14 at the time. I'm a sales rep and was looking for a meeting room in a rural hospital's pathology department and got lost. I started opening doors to find someone who could help me. When I opened one door, there was a primate of some sort, not human, that was suspended by its wrists that had all of its skin flayed off. Presumably, it was a primate cadaver being used for anatomy lessons, but it scared the shit out of me. The skin was removed from the skull, but the eyeballs remained, so it appeared to be staring at me as I entered the room. Pathology departments in small-town hospitals are creepy as hell. It's creepy to me, but not all that creepy on the whole. But on 2 different occasions, I've helped my dad with his iPad and found very specific types of porn in open windows because he doesn't feel the need to close them, apparently. Driving a friend and his family to airport. He is an ER doc and I am not. We watch a trail of motorcyclists, group of them out for a ride. Anyhow, one of the guys goes up, hits the side of a truck and then cracks his head wide open at highway acceleration speeds and goes end over end with no upper part of his skull. 2 other motorcyclists stand there with sheet or something to block the view. Hard to miss the reddish-pink brain stain on the highway. While working in a level 1 trauma center, calibrating medical x-ray equipment, I was in the emergency room hearing noises and voices, normal stuff. Anyway, I heard this kid crying, screaming at the top of his lungs. Sound like pretty awful lungs, I was guessing a high school age. Everyone was moving fast, as they normally do. However, they had looks on their faces of deep concern. When one of the techs I knew well had a moment, I asked, "Guessing a kid fell out of his treehouse?" The tech shook his head and claimed, "That's no kid in there. That's a full-grown man who was riding his motorcycle and came in some assembly required." I couldn't resist. A 200-pound man, at over 6 feet tall, in black Harley-Davidson leather. He lost his arm above the elbow and one of his legs was twisted around completely backwards. A visual I will never get out of my head. That much blood, you can physically smell the iron in the air. That's what I get for looking. I was at my friend's house and we were playing on her dad's computer. Somehow we ended up in the search history and he'd been to porn sites about bestiality. I was like 12 and I've never been the same. I was driving to a Jimmy Buffett concert in Pennsylvania back in 2007 with my brother and 2 friends. We were just driving along and saw a 4-door sedan in the right-hand lane about half a mile in front of us swerving. Figured maybe they were going to the concert and pre-gamed a little too much. Anyway, my brother decides to pull up on them and see what we can see. As we were approaching, we see handfuls of papers being thrown out the passenger window. Confused, we speed up and are just about to pass them on the left. We see a couple in their 50s in the car. The husband, who is driving, is just throwing haymakers at his wife, right to her face in the passenger seat as he's driving. Time feels like it stood still for a moment. We're driving alongside with me in the passenger seat, window rolled down, flailing my arms around and yelling, trying to get the guy's attention. Remind you, we are doing 55 miles per hour. Another car comes up behind us, and we actually manage to block the dude in and slow him down. Meanwhile, my friend in the back seat is on the phone with 911, trying to get a cop out there. Long story short, we end up slowing the car down to a slow crawl, and cops show up in what seemed like a minute. Cops took our statements and arrested the dude. It was a pretty quiet ride the rest of the way to the concert. I've been asked many times on here what a haymaker is. Imagine winding up with your arm and hitting something or someone as hard as you can. In this case, trigger warning, the man was driving and holding onto the wheel with his left hand, taking his right fist across his body to the left, almost touching the driver's side window with his fist, and swinging it across his body toward the passenger seat headrest from 9 to 3 o'clock. However, in a car you were mostly at the same height as this poor lady's face was taking all the contact. A drunk idiot got hit by a car right in front of me in the middle of the night in the middle of freaking nowhere. His condition was unstable. The trauma helicopter with trauma team, of course, was needed. I was holding a sheet with another person so onlookers wouldn't see what was happening and, well, it wasn't pretty at all. Ever heard ribs crack due to CPR? And his lung collapsed, or it was filling with blood, not sure. But the trauma doctor opened up his chest right in front of me. I do not have any medical background and, well, I've seen things that night that I wasn't supposed to. But it did give me more appreciation, seeing those professionals in action, basically performing surgery right in front of me. I was rather impressed by how methodical they were and their cool-headedness. When I was little, me and my family lived over 20 kilometers from a city in the woods. We had a nanny stay with us when our parents were away. Once, when only me, my sister, we were around 8 years old, and Nanny were home while playing outside, we saw a bunch of people emerge from the forest nearby and walk slowly like zombies toward our house. They tried climbing the fence, but they were too out of it to accomplish such a task. The nanny called our mom, and she drove home from the city and took us all to our grandparents. We later found out that there was some drug-infused party going on not too far from our home, and 2 people died from overdosing, 1 from stab wounds there. To this day, I feel super grateful that they were too tired or drugged out to get past our fence that day, and police were able to apprehend the ones that stayed around long enough. Not a unique experience, but one I didn't want to have. NSFL, 90s. I was in 5th or 6th grade, hanging out at a friend's house when his uncle, who was maybe 19 or 20 at the time, called us into their living room. He sat us down and popped in a videotape for all of us to watch. It was some bootleg version of what he called Faces of Death, but from synopsis, I've read nothing I saw matches the descriptions. I was horrified and frozen from the peer pressure as we watched videos of people jumping from burning buildings and bouncing. A public hanging where the guy doesn't die immediately, so people start tugging on his body to break the neck. Just multiple videos of people dying or being killed. The worst part, my friend and his uncle were laughing like they were watching America's Funniest Videos or something. I didn't watch all of it. After a few of the clips, my disgust overcame my fear and the peer pressure. I told them they were sick for enjoying watching that video, and I ran out of the house. I puked on my way home, and those images have never left my brain. I was backpacking on the Appalachian Trail, staying in one of the multi-story shelters, basically a barn. A little background is these shelters are notoriously overrun by rodents, so you need to store food and hygiene stuff in a tree. You share the barn with like 5 to 10 strangers, and it's usually a fun way to make new friends. Anyway, I was up in the loft and woke up to a thudding noise. I thought I imagined it, but it happened again every 2 to 4 minutes. I peek my head down the ladder, and there's a dude sitting there super still with a red light headlamp pointed down at some peanut butter crackers. A rat goes to get some cracker, and he slams a knife into it and piles it onto a stack of dead rodents. I was creeped the F out, but the dude turned out to be chill and made everyone coffee the next morning. He totaled 13-ish rats. We had a funeral pyre for them. I worked in a hospital when I was younger, food service, delivering food trays to the patients. I walked into one of the psych rooms unknowingly. There was a crazy lady sitting in a chair holding a bedpan full of feces. And let me tell you, when I say crazy, this woman had a look in her eye that I haven't ever seen and don't ever want to see again. She said, "If you don't get out of my dwelling, I'm going to throw shit on you, little boy." I've never been so freaked out in my life. Needless to say, I dropped the damn tray and ran out.
Has anyone here ever actually called into one of the FBI rewards for information on criminals and won the money? And what happened? Not safe for work. My neighbor down the road growing up was always getting into trouble. One day, someone robbed a gas station with a gun and accidentally shot the clerk, so he claimed, and the police didn't know who did it. After about a month, they offered up a small reward for information. The guy arranged to have his wife turn him in to collect the reward because she would need it since he knew he was going away for a long time. Don't remember the full details, but my mom called the cops on some guy who was featured on America's Most Wanted. Guy was on the run for several things, I think, but still took the time out to get his tag renewed at the DMV. 10 years ago, I'm working front desk at this third-rate motel, and I'm the only employee on property until 7 a.m. So I get this report of an unruly guest and check it out. Dude's whacked out on something, threatening other guests, and I call the cops to remove him. On their way out, they tell me he's got active warrants in another state. I don't think anything of it until 3 months later, I got a check sent to me at work from a sheriff's office 2 states over. Turns out, the guy was wanted for a double murder, and I got the reward when he was convicted. I felt pretty good about that. This is kind of related. When I was younger, there was a bad drought, and the lake I went to fish at was probably 10 feet below where it usually is, maybe more, and I went to go fishing under a bridge with my stepdad. I got bored, so I started playing in the rocks. I found an old pocket knife and a pistol, turned the pistol into the local police department, and got a medal back from them and a letter where it was used in a case to convict a murderer. I don't really remember the details. I was in 4th or 5th grade. My sister has a pretty weird hobby. She solves cold cases by helping match descriptions of bodies that have never been positively ID'd to missing persons matching the body's description. She solved several cases and submits them to the FBI tip line. Twice now, she's gotten phone calls from law enforcement as a result, one from the FBI and one from a local police department. One had reward money tied to it from long, long ago. She turned it down. Both times, she's informed the agency calling that the missing person disappeared before she was 10 years old. That's her limit. She doesn't look at recent cases to avoid potential problems, and they just kind of shrug and move on. That's all. Semi-related, I guess. I made an anonymous tip to a local library about someone posting online about wanting to do something sexual in the bathroom of the library. Local police and FBI gave me a call on the actual number, not the one I used to call in the tip, and asked me a few questions. Turns out, they set up a raid and caught some 19-year-old who was trying to meet a 10 to 11-year-old boy online. Got $500, and they offered to pay me to go on apps or websites like Craigslist and such to find the same kind of people. It was pretty cool. In college, we had a drive-by shooting on my block. The police showed up and asked all the neighbors if they had any information. I had just heard the shots from my house and wasn't able to help. A few days later, I was walking home from class and I found a shell casing in the grass near where the shooting was. I didn't want to touch it, so I got home and called the police. I was very, very specific about exactly where the shell casing was and that I do not want the police to come to my door. The neighbors were pretty sketchy people and I just didn't want to be seen being involved. Well, these fucking cops walked right to my front door and asked for me. I told them exactly where to find it again. They walked to the general area, looked for maybe a minute, then walked back to my front door and asked if I could show them where it was. God damn it. So I led them to shell casing while the sketchy neighbors stood on their porch and watched, looking very displeased. Apparently, the fingerprints on the casing matched one of their suspects and he was arrested and went to jail. The cops stopped by a few months later with a $20 gift card to a sub shop. I don't think we have such a reward system in Sweden, but in the mid-90s when I was younger, around 4 or 5, my father used to be a pro water skier. He and his friends used to train at the local lake and I was often with him there. One day, I was on the pier while my father and others were skiing when I saw the rainbow on the water by the pier. I told my dad about it, and he of course understood that it was not the rainbow, but petrol oil in the water. No one knew where it came from, so they started checking the boat for leaks but found none. After a while, someone noticed it was coming from under the water, a few meters from land. They ended up calling the police, who came there with divers. They found 2 cars, a few bags of jewelry, electronics, stereo, VHS player, stuff like that, golf clubs, bags of clothes, and parts of a body in one of the cars. Everything had been laying there for a long time. The VHS player was old, like one of the first models released. The cars were also old. The police thought it was things that had been stolen and dumped there. I did not get to see the body, obviously, but apparently it was not possible to identify who it was or why it was in one of the cars. The police took everything they found with them when they left. My father and his friends were asked a bunch of questions about if they knew who could have put the stuff there, but they had no idea since it had been put there in the 70s, long before they even started to train at that lake. I don't think they heard from the police again after that. The oil or petrol came from the cars. Rust had made it so something started to leak. Before the police left, one of the officers told me I would make a fine detective someday. I remember being super proud of that and telling all my friends about it, but they did not believe me. I called Crime Stoppers once. The local news released a video of someone violently robbing a store. They beat up the cashier pretty bad. I knew it the second the video started who it was, a guy I used to party with and had spent the night with a few times. The Crime Stopper folks gave me a number to write down to claim the money if he was convicted. I wrote it on my hand, then washed it off accidentally like an idiot. It was on the smaller side, I think around 1,000, but it would have made a big difference at the time. And the guy did up getting convicted and is still in prison now. I'm sure a bunch of people called in though, so I don't know how much I would have gotten. Anyone who grew up in my area who was around my age would have known that guy. My stepmom got a $25,000 FBI reward when she came across a girl who had been abducted and her whole family was murdered. The girl had been held in the cabin next door to my parents' cabin for about 3 months. The guy who did it left her alone for a couple of hours and she escaped in the middle of winter in a very cold area. My stepmom was walking her dog in a pretty isolated area and the girl ran up to her. She was obviously very disoriented and traumatized, but stepmom helped her escape through the woods to a safe place and called the cops. There was a huge media circus, and although the reward money, $25,000 from the FBI and $25,000 from a local business, was awarded to my stepmom, she concluded that since the girl had technically rescued herself, it was appropriate for the money to go to her. Apparently, there is some rule that you can't get FBI reward money in a case where you're either the victim or the perpetrator, so the money had to be accepted and then gifted back to the girl. In the end, the girl got the money, and my stepmom got a big tax bill that year because reward money is taxable. She got to be interviewed on national TV by Gayle King though, and help save someone's life, so she's pretty okay with it. Long time ago, 20 plus years, a nearby bank was robbed at gunpoint. The article had a very good photo of the guy. Turns out, he was my sketchy neighbor. Saw him that morning, he was still wearing what was shown in the photo. Long story short, cops bust him. He goes away for a long hitch. They said a small reward is available. Told them to donate it to a nearby animal shelter. Everyone wins. Well, almost everyone. Well, my story isn't with the FBI, but it is about getting money for information about a criminal. My family used to own an internet cafe back in 2006. We used to use real names for usernames. We used to have a weekend deal for $20 you could have from 7 p.m. Friday night to 7 a.m. Saturday morning. Anyways, we had a cop come in around 2 a.m. Saturday morning asking if a Mr. Douchebag was here tonight. We look him up and yeah, he had bought a land pass plus a few hours. But he left around 11:30 or 12 a.m. The cop tells us he was wanted for assaulting a cop, and if we see him again, to call dispatch. A month goes by, and we get another visit from a detective who was asking about Mr. DB again. I was working the counter and said I didn't remember him, but let me look at the logs. I was surprised to see that he had come in a few days prior on that one day that week that I wasn't there and had used some banked time. The detective gives me his card and said there's a $100 reward for his arrest. 2 days after this, I'm working the counter again, and a guy with a baseball cap pulled way down, sunglasses, backpack, and long sleeves comes in to add time to his account. This was the middle of July, so it already put me on alert. Sure enough, it's Mr. DB again, and he sat down to a computer and was checking email or something. I calmly picked up the cordless phone and walked to the back room. There was a little window where we could watch the whole store from, and called the police line as quick as I could. Told the dispatcher that there was a guy who was wanted for assaulting a cop in my store. She said officers were being dispatched and I should stay on the line till they were there. I was amazed at the response time. They had officers walking into my store within 45 seconds of me calling the dispatcher. 4 officers calmly walked into the front and 2 entered in from the back door. Mr. DB was so engrossed with what he was doing, he didn't even notice them come in. They walk up to him and the officer in front puts his hand on his shoulder to get his attention and turns him around asking for identification. Mr. DB was sitting with the chair in the lowest setting, and he slowly removed his hat and set it on the desk like he knew what was about to happen. He was outnumbered 6-1, and he decided that he was going to run. He got 2 steps before 4 officers were on him, bringing him down to the ground. They didn't even tackle him. It was more like they just guided him down into the wall and started trying to subdue him. He had to be on something because it took all 6 officers and being tased twice to cuff him. When I say tased twice, I mean the first taser ran out, and they either had to reload it or use another one because they tased him for a good 60 seconds. He was let out, and they took my statement. A few days later, the detective returned and gave me $100 cash. Honestly, the money didn't really mean much. It was cooler seeing their response time and tactics when it was about someone who assaulted one of their own. It really was kind of like a movie. We never cleaned the black scuff marks off the wall because it was a good story starter. TL, DR. I got $100 for turning in a guy who assaulted a cop and then got captured in my store a month later by 6 officers who responded within 45 seconds of calling the dispatcher. I met a guy who was in town from overseas while he had family in the local hospital on extended stay. Talked to him for quite a while, was a nice guy. Fast forward a couple of weeks, someone with a very similar description was wanted for human trafficking, same country of origin, same apartment complex that he was staying, reported to Crime Stoppers, never heard anything. Could all be coincidental. Some might say too coincidental. I chased down a commercial truck hijacker. I saw him hijack a truck full of merchandise and cigarettes. He left the driver bloodied in the street, but he was otherwise okay. The hijacker didn't know much on how to drive a stick, so it gave me enough time to get to my car and try to follow him. I came across a police car cruising the neighborhood and flagged him down. I told them what happened, but they didn't seem to care. They turned in front of me in the direction I was headed as I continued to search for the truck. I suspected that it had turned down a side street. As we came towards a T in the road, the stolen truck turns in front of us, headed in the opposite direction. The cops move a little to the side to allow the truck to make its turn. I turned my car sideways to block the truck and laid on the horn. I could see the two cops look at each other like, WTF? They sat there wondering what the hell I was doing. So I got out and ran toward the truck, which spooked the hijacker. As he ran, I double-checked the truck to make sure it would not move anymore. I saw a fake gun on the floor and a pipe wrench. I took the pipe wrench and proceeded to chase the hijacker. When the cops saw me chasing the hijacker, they got out and also started chasing him. I couldn't catch up to him, so I threw the pipe wrench at him. I didn't expect it to hit him, but I nailed him right on the head, knocking him down. The cops caught up and arrested him. The hijacker had been wanted for 8 years' worth of commercial hijackings valued at over $5 million in merchandise. I testified against him in court, and he got 16 years in prison. The company that had been victim to his hijackings sent me a thank you letter. No reward from them or their insurance company. Not me, but my brother. My brother is a real estate agent in Puerto Vallarta, so he tends to see a lot of people. There was this guy that would frequently visit and own property in one of the big golf courses. My brother happened to be browsing the FBI Most Wanted and see in person that the FBI digitally rendered of what the person looked like now as he was over 80. And it was very similar to this person he would frequently see in the area. My brother got into contact with them, and they asked for photos of the person and a little bit about who he was. My brother had to gather as much info of his schedule and the layout of the condos, so they made a plan and arrested him. If I'm correct, he traveled to Guadalajara, and that's where he was arrested. This was about 8 years ago. Serious. What's the creepiest, most unexplainable thing that happened to you? I was 12, and had just gotten my first mobile phone. One weekend, I get a call from an older-sounding man with an Australian accent. Not that weird, I live in Australia, but kind of relevant. He asks, "Is this my first and last name?" I go, "Yes." He takes a deep breath, sounds really emotional, and says, "I'm your grandpa." All I could say was, "No, you're not." Both my grandfathers have been dead for years by that point, plus they were both European. I'm first-generation Australian. There's no way that even if one of my grandmas had been getting side action, that this guy was my grandpa. He sounded disappointed and hung up. Haunts me to this day. Our family cat passed away when I was 14, and it really sucked. He was a great cat. Fast forward to 16 years old, and I'm sitting by my mom on the couch, and she's showing me something on Facebook on her iPad when I swear I saw a cat out of the corner of my eye. So I look up, and it's our old cat walking into the kitchen, rubbing his tail against the wall as he made the corner as he always did. My mom also looked up just after me and stared and looked back at me, and I was like, "Did you just see our old cat?" She replied, "Yeah, he just went around the corner there." I got up and went and looked in the kitchen, and he's nowhere to be found. 10 years later, my mom and I still talk about how creepy that was that we both saw it. My brother passed away in 2008. Fast forward to 2016. I was asleep, and I had a dream about him, as I often did since he passed away. This dream was different. It was like he was talking directly to me, looking straight in my eyes. In the dream, I asked him, "Is it really you?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Prove it." He then reached out and touched me on the arm, and when he did, I jolted up in bed, wide awake, covered in sweat. I thought all this was really strange, and I went to the bathroom to put some water on my face. As I was looking in the mirror, I saw that there was a backwards R written on my arm in pen, exactly where he touched me in the dream. The letter R was the first letter of his name. There were no pens in my bedroom, and I've never sleepwalked before. You can call me crazy, or lying, or whatever, but that was the single most unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me. Every time my mother cooks a specific dessert, an earthquake happens in Chile. That only happened twice between 2015 and 2016. Strangely, the two earthquakes had almost the same magnitude. Was giving my then 2, maybe 3-year-old daughter a bath when staying in an old house, holiday rental.
We had play cups, saucers, and a teapot which she was filling up with the bathwater and pouring into the cups. "This one is for you, Daddy. This one is for me. And this one is for the old lady in the doorway." No one there. I had a dream a few weeks ago. Bad times in my life, right on the cusp of things getting much better. They are now. And I was sleeping badly and just not mentally well. My favorite uncle, closest thing I had to a dad growing up, actual dad was not good at dadding, died suddenly of a heart attack a few years ago. It was abrupt and shocked everyone. I was across the country and distraught by the news. He was by far the closest of any of my family members. I was dreaming about something irrelevant to him or anything, and suddenly I turned around and there he was, just standing there holding his arms out and grinning like, "Hey!" I just lost sense of the dream immediately. I was so thrilled to see him, like the dream was a work assignment, and he was just showing up to break the monotony. I jumped into his arms and hugged him and kept telling him how happy I was to see him. The rest of that dream, he just hung out with me. I was just so happy. I've never had an experience like that because, honestly, I've always been the aloof black sheep in my family, and I never imagined anyone would care to visit me after they died of all people, if such a thing is possible. But there he was, and it will stick with me always that maybe he just came to say what's up and give me a little slap on the shoulder and make sure I kept on trucking because better stuff was coming. I miss him. My parents and brother were out. He was meeting his friends and my parents were somewhere. I can't remember, LOL. Fast forward a couple hours later or so. It's dark now, whoopee. And I hear something downstairs, a thud. Then I hear a flipping hello. No one was home except me. I go to the landing at the top of the stairs and say hello, thinking it was my brother coming home as he rode his bike and would put it in the garden shed and come through the back door. I get nothing in return. My brother likes to scare me a lot around the house, so I start thinking, it's him. He's going to scare me in 3, 2, 1. Nothing. I go down 2 stairs and say, hello, peering over the banister to see if I can see my brother hiding, waiting for me to come downstairs. Nothing. He came home an hour or so after that happened, and my parents came home about 10 or so minutes after my brother did. To this day, I still have no clue on what the hell said hello. This actually just happened last week. I've been traveling for work a lot recently, and as such I stay in hotels. Not extraordinary, nor are they hellholes, just regular generic hotels. Well, the one I was at last week had an elevator that was annoyingly slow. Everything it did was slow. Whether it was coming to your floor, opening or closing of the doors, all took what felt like forever. I'm leaving the hotel to go to the gym, and as I approached the elevator, I saw a little girl standing in the elevator. Assume little girl, just saw a short figure with long hair. Didn't catch the face because the door was closing. I figured I'd give it a second. I didn't want to press the button and have the door stop closing and the little girl have to stand on an elevator with a big adult male she didn't know. I waited maybe 3 seconds after the door shut and then pressed the elevator button. The elevator that I saw the little girl standing in opened, and she was nowhere to be seen. I then took the stairs. One night, probably around 2 a.m., I was sleeping and dreaming. I can't remember the dream, but in the dream, it all of a sudden got quiet and everything became still. A voice in my dream comes out of nowhere and starts saying, "Wake up, go to Nicholas, my 3-year-old son room now. Wake up, wake up. AMI, my real name, wake up." I wake up and lay there for a few seconds, thinking how weird of a dream it was. I chalked it up to a crazy dream, but decided to go check on my kids. I head to Nicholas's room and open his door. He sleeps with a pretty bright nightlight and all the other lights off. When I opened the door, I saw a shadow figure standing at the foot of his bed. I immediately threw myself over my son and started screaming to the figure to go away. The shadow rushes to the window and hops out. I live in a trailer at the time. Our windows were double hung, the kind that slide up and down, and we had screens in all of them. This was during the summer, so I kept the windows open often. My husband works nights, so I scooped my son up and went to my daughter's shared room and locked the door. I called 911 and the police were there in like 10 minutes. What happened was my neighbor had a nephew staying the summer with him. The nephew was 18 and was going to be helping his uncles at his construction business. His uncle, my neighbor, and my husband sometimes share a beer or two and talk outside. My husband was telling the neighbor how he would be on night shift the next 2 weeks. His nephew overheard and chose to break in one of the nights he knew my husband was working. He swore to the cops and everyone else he only broke in to steal shit for his drug habit. He didn't have a record for harming children or nothing like that, so he may have been telling the truth about looking for money or shit to sell, but who knows. Another time, I was sleeping when the voice came again in my dream. Like the last time, everything in my dream went silent and still. And again, I can't remember the dream. The voice comes again and says, wake up, Amy. Go to Nova. Nova needs you. Nova is my daughter. She was 6 at the time. I woke up and immediately hauled ass to the girls' room. Before I even opened the door, I could hear her. Nova has severe asthma and has been hospitalized more times than I can count. I heard her wheezing and struggling to breathe. I turned the light on, grabbed her inhaler and a steroid that she has to take when her asthma gets bad, and screamed for my husband to call 911. He was home that night. The ambulance came and took her to the hospital. Her oxygen levels were dangerously low, so she was in the hospital for about a week. If I didn't get to her in time, she would have died. I haven't heard the voice since. I have no idea what it was. Maybe mother's intuition, maybe a subconscious thing, maybe a deceased family member or friend helping me out from the other side. Stayed in a luxurious resort in a small island with 3 of my friends when we were in high school. My friend's dad was the manager. This was a tiny island. You could walk around in less than a day, and there were only a few suites. Very exclusive, and it was far from the nearest town. At night, it would get really dark and peaceful. The staff there always talked about how they had strange or ghostly encounters throughout the years. FYI, this island was used as a camp or hiding place for soldiers back in the day. It still has the lighthouse they used that's over hundreds of years old. Anyway, our room had 2 king-size beds. In the middle of the night while everyone else was asleep, I woke up suddenly and felt extremely hot. I was sweating like crazy, even if the AC was on full blast and it was blowing straight at me. I felt something weird, like a presence next to my side of the bed. I never felt so scared in my entire life, but I was shaking and sweating profusely. But what was really crazy was that only one side of my body was hot. The one by the edge of the bed, the other was cold. I hid under the blanket and closed my eyes as hard as I could because I was afraid that if I opened it, I would see something. I felt the energy of that presence get closer to me, like we were face to face. I kept inching towards my friend who was sleeping next to me. After a while, it suddenly disappeared and I wasn't hot anymore. The next morning, I didn't mention it to anyone until they talked about how cold it was in the bedroom. They were freezing the whole night. Then I told them what I felt that night. My friend who slept beside me got really quiet. She told me not to freak out, but she woke up last night too, and she saw a girl standing next to my side of the bed and just stared right at me. I've never not believed in ghosts, but I also don't necessarily believe in them, if that makes sense. But I just can't explain that night. It was the first time I had experienced a feeling I just couldn't explain or shake off. Still bothers me to this day. I spend a lot of time in the woods and occasionally camp in the bed of my truck with a tarp tented over it. While this makes for great rain protection, I can't see out all the time. I was camping in Georgia, up in the Allegheny Mountains. It was foggy night, which isn't too uncommon, and I was laying in bed getting ready to go to sleep when a bunch of coyotes started howling and barking not too far away. This isn't too unusual, but I'm still not totally used to it. What happened next, though, is what was so creepy. Normally, when coyotes go off, it builds up and then dies off slowly. I heard a coyote yelp as if it had been injured, and it went dead silent. Then I heard a quiet crunch on the leaves as something got closer. Then the crunch of the stones as it got to where I was parked. Then it was silent. It was then that the distinct sound of a nail on my truck's side rang through my ears like nails on a chalkboard. Something was just feet from me, then nothing. It brushed my tarp, and that was the last of it. Silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I got out, and all I could find was a scratch on the side of my truck from the nails and a single coyote footprint. My guess is that a coyote hurt itself, which spooked them, and one came in close to check out the smells of my camp. But that night had to be one of the absolutely creepiest nights of my life. About 12 years ago, was sleeping on the bed beside my wife who was awake and reading, pre-parent. Was just drifting into dream state when an entity made an appearance in my dream. The entity was jarringly at odds visually with the rest of the dream. Style and appearance was dazzling, solidly defined and detailed, making the rest of the dream appear to be a washed out of focus film being shown in the background. In fact, the out-of-placeness of the entity was so jarring it shocked me, flinchingly awake when it stared at me. My flinching caused my wife to ask me if I was okay. I don't know what compelled me to ask the following, but I asked her to close her eyes, clear her mind, and describe the first thing she saw. She described the entity to near perfection: physical appearance, headgear, color, facial expression, the lot. The most notable features being the construction style, but kinda not, hat, and the shimmering golden color. A few years ago, on a couple of occasions, my 2-year-old asked me and my wife who was the Goldie man with the hat standing behind Daddy. Not even a year ago, I had my friend over for a sleepover, and fast forward to like 2 a.m. We got bored, so we're outside just throwing paper airplanes we made. I threw mine and went out to get it, and all of a sudden, just felt the most fear I had ever felt for no reason, and look over to my friend on the patio and watch a big orb just fly over him. Keep in mind, I did not know that orbs had stuff to do with the paranormal, but something inside me just told me that we had to get out of there. So in a low voice, I just had to go inside, and he was really confused because at this point, I was acting very scared and off. But I just raced to the front door and went in, and he followed, and we got to my room, and I told him what I saw, and for some reason, I started to have tears roll down my face for the first time in years. Thinking back on it, and I'm still very confused. I was 14 and my sister was 13. We lived in a town in Pennsylvania that doesn't really exist anymore. It was summer, hot, no air conditioning. This is maybe 3 years before my parents got central air. We had the windows open and the entire summer, like every summer. We lived near a creek and could hear it babbling if it rained really hard the day before. In the summer it was always low, and so we never heard it during those months, other than insects and cars driving down the interstate toward or away from the quarry mine. If you were on our property, you didn't hear much. It was not rural, but almost. There was a Frosty Freeze and 6 to 7 other shops about 2 miles away. My parents went out on a date and left my sister and I home. 2 young girls, but we had been left home for almost 3 to 4 years at this point. We were used to it. We cooked a pizza and were watching TV after our parents left. The phone rang just as we heard what sounded like a person somersault across the roof of our house. My sister answered the phone, but when she picked up, heard nothing but static. But not the usual static noises. She explained it like a slowed down static hum, like if a TV channel mixed with an egg beater on low. She said hello a few more times, listened to the egg beater static for a few more seconds, then hung up. We went back to watching TV and thought nothing of it. Maybe 40 minutes later, we hear footsteps on the roof. Very soft footsteps. I remember listening to almost 10 before looking at my sister, who was also looking at me with a white face in complete shock. Eventually, we came up with the nerve to get up and go outside and look. Just barely visible behind our large, already outdated TV antenna was a man lying face down on our roof. He was tall, skinny, and had huge white tennis shoes on. He was kind of an outline shape except for his shoes, which seemed to glow. My sister was spooked. I was crazy. I started to scream at the man. I threw a few small rocks and missed him terribly. He didn't move. My sister was tugging at me to get back inside. Finally, after I realized the man wasn't moving, I got freaked out and ran inside too. We huddled in my parents' room, nothing for almost 20 minutes. It felt like 2 hours. Our parents weren't due home until midnight, and we had no way of reaching them in 1995. Then we hear a knocking sound, like the man is knocking on our roof, like it was a front door. I had had enough. I rush outside, dragging my sister, ready to confront this crazy person. We now see him lying face down on the first top line of the roof, his arms and feet dangling on either side of the lip. We freak, lock ourselves in the basement. Our parents find us in the morning. I pissed myself while sleeping. Never found out what it was about, and my dad thought we were lying. What are your experiences with the paranormal? I never experienced anything truly paranormal until recently. I was asleep on my stomach, my head facing the wall, and I woke up to my dog growling. I told her to hush, somewhat checked the room, and called her onto the bed. As I'm falling asleep again, I hear someone cry in the corner of my room. Think the witch from Left 4 Dead. My dog slowly stood, hackles up, and growling again toward the corner of my room, and I was too terrified to even look. I turned the lights on and slept with them on for a few days. Had a few, but my personal favorite is the dog that stays in my basement bedroom. I have 2 dogs, and their favorite toys are tennis balls. Sometimes one will roll from under a dresser or wherever towards my dogs as if it's trying to play with them. I've answered this elsewhere before. My apartment is crazy haunted. It's got to be. But it's not like a horror movie where stuff like keeps escalating or anything. Stuff will happen, and then it'll be quiet for a few days to a few weeks to a few months, and then it starts back up again. When activity spikes, doors will open and close by themselves. I've had my bedroom door slammed right in my face twice. I yelled at one of my cats for knocking a book off the shelf, only to realize that the cat wasn't on the shelf. The book was too heavy for him to knock it off anyway, and the book had been thrown at him. We get cold drafts. Both cats like to track things going across the room that we can't see. I've desperately checked and looked for bugs sometimes. No bugs, nothing, just empty air. This thing also really likes fucking with my wife. It pulls her hair, it growls at her, it scratches her. I've watched something yank her shirt like they grabbed part of it and pulled back. I've watched the shirt get stretched. The only time I felt something touch me, I think I was trying to sleep, and I felt very clearly this cold hand just press against the back and stay there. It was absolutely chilling. The creepiest shit by far is I saw a legit copy of my wife walk behind me in the mirror. It wasn't her. Apparently since then, my wife has seen a copy of me too. The latest thing that has started to creep me out is our bedroom closet door has started to shake in its frame. It wakes me up and sometimes it lasts for hours. It could be the heat unsettled it, and now it doesn't sit right, because sometimes when I walk towards it to investigate it, it'll stop. I don't know though. I kinda just expect things to happen now. I work in a mental hospital. While the building itself isn't that old, there have been both suicides and murders, and it's built on the site of an old classic asylum. Every now and then, on the night shift, the alarm goes off in an empty room. Doors open and close when no one's nearby, and a few weeks ago, I was alone in the staff room in the middle of the night when my coworker was in the bathroom. Suddenly, I heard someone cough or sigh loudly in the room just outside the staff room. I thought it was one of the patients and went to see who it was, only to find an empty room. So I was in boarding school. It was lights out, everyone sleeping. I wake up because I need to use the washroom. So I come down from my top bunk and see Miriam, my classmate, on the lower opposite bunk sleeping. As I was approaching the washroom, showers were on your left and toilet right. I see Miriam washing her clothes in a bucket in the shower area. Me, shocked, I asked Miriam, "What are you doing washing clothes at like 3 a.m. in the morning?" Miriam looked up and smiled at me, not saying a word. So I confusedly went to the toilet, but walking facing Miriam. I used the toilet while still looking at her, wash my hands and leave. All the while, this bitch is just washing clothes, looking at me smiling. I walk back to my room, see Miriam on her bed, same nightie and everything. I don't think much of it. I was tired. Climbed my bunk and off to sleep. Morning came. I asked Miriam why she was washing clothes in the bathroom so early in the morning. She was confused and said she never even went to the toilet last night. I told her what I saw, and she immediately started praying and saying, "God forbid." Nigerians living in Nigeria are very religious. I realized at this point I had seen a spirit of some sort, so I start to pray seriously. Nigeria has juju. Scary shit happens in that country. You hear stories, but this was the first time I ever witnessed something so disturbing. There was reportedly a little boy who died while living in my house decades ago. Occasionally, he sits down next to me on the couch or at the foot of my bed at night when I'm watching TV. I can literally hear it and see the couch or bed dip down slightly. Other people in the house have reported their TVs randomly changing channels, usually to the Cartoon Network, and we regularly hear footsteps in the attic, which was his favorite place to hang out, as there's a small window up there that looks out over Mexico from the US border. I've never been up there. That's his place. My stepdad, who died last summer, has visited me in my dreams. Not like been there, but legit conversations about the whole situation leading up to and concluding in his death. Now my logic tells me I make it all up myself, but there's a part of me that feels it is real. When I was a young girl, maybe 13 at the time, I went into the bathtubs to shower. I would lock the door whether or not someone was home. One day I was sitting in the tube and no one was home. The doorknob just started to violently twist and turn and eventually popped open. There was no one standing there, but the door just unlocked itself and popped right open. I nervously put on a towel and started looking to see if maybe my parents were home. No one was there, no car in the driveway, and there was snow all over the ground and no fresh footprints leading to the entrance. So every now and again, and only when I wanted to shower, the doorknob would violently twist and turn. Sometimes I would grab it and open it myself to try and catch someone, but every time I did, there was no one there. This got old real quick after a few months. I stopped giving a shit and would just shout out, "Just walk through it, you pervert." I cursed it out a few times and eventually it stopped happening altogether. I will never forget that, and when I told my parents, they just casually said, "Oh yeah, it's a djinn. Djinn like bathrooms, like WTF." So back when I was a kid, I went missing and no one in the house could find me. It was middle of the night and we lived in a 3-storied house. According to my brother, he found me in the terrace trying to jump from the ledge. He asked me what I was doing and I replied that my friends downstairs wanted me to join them by jumping. Obviously, there was no one there. He quickly grabbed me and brought me to safety. I don't have any memory of this incident. Well, when I was a younger adult and into drugs and doing it for so long, this shadow appeared to me and I asked it who it was, and it said Satan. So I never did drugs again. That image just haunts the shit out of me. This one time I was babysitting my niece. She brought her Elmo over. Mind you, there was no battery inside because that shit toy was so annoying I lied to my niece it was broken. Out of the blue, Elmo started laughing and talking. I walked over to shut it off and remembered I took the batteries out. There was also a time I rented out an apartment. The owner mentioned someone who had passed away. Light switches and TV would go on and off, thinking it was just the electricity problem. One day, my picture frames would fall out of the blue. I didn't think much of it. Then, during shower, the light switch went off. I went out of the shower to turn it back on. As soon as I returned to the showers, I closed the curtain, trying to finish up. All of a sudden, the curtains opened wildly from one wall to another and freaked out and ran out of there. I had a lot of encounters, but these were the most active I came across. I was spending my summer at my dad's place. My dad would always leave for work at around 8 p.m. at the time, so I would be left alone with my sister, grandma, and older cousin. One night during the first week of April, I suddenly woke up to a wide open bedroom door. Maybe my grandma left it open. That's when I saw this woman in a white glowing dress, and she had her hair covering her face just like a horror movie, and each time I would blink, she would get gradually closer. And me, being the dumbass kid I was, I kept blinking just to check if I was dreaming or imagining stuff. And once she was already at the bottom of my bed, that's when I closed my eyes and forced myself to sleep. For 2 whole months during our stay in that house, I would wake up during the same time every night and see that woman. At times when I would wake up, I would keep my eyes shut and just try to sleep, but I would hear slow rattling that sounds like small materials inside a metal container or case. When it was time to leave that house because school was coming up, I was so relieved knowing I wouldn't be disturbed by anything paranormal. The scary part about the paranormal experiences for me is the silence. It's not like any horror movie. It would be dead silent, and in movies you would be able to imagine events that could happen that you can anticipate, but when it's real life, you won't be able to think of any possible events, which make it scarier because you don't know what would happen. I used to hear voices in our house when I was little. No idea what age it started at, and it wasn't constant, but I would fairly regularly wake up in the middle of the night hearing conversations as if a radio show or talk TV was on somewhere. It wasn't loud, and I couldn't make out anything actually said. I would wander around the house looking for the source of the voices for who knows how long, in a semi-dream state. I remember hearing the talking and walking around, but I know I wasn't fully awake. I would end up standing next to my parents' bed, hovering over my mom, and stand there until she woke up and got a heart attack from seeing me. I'm sure I'm responsible for most of her gray hairs. The voices stopped when we moved out of that house. After my divorce in 1999, I was left to manage the ranch on my own. Because I had to buy so much equipment, it was decided that I should become a reserve fire guard to have more money in the bank. We went to work, and in 2001 my daughter arrived. We were all in the kitchen one day, and I heard the refrigerator start and then stop. I looked in on the kids and saw they were still there. I closed the kitchen door so that the kids wouldn't have to stay in the kitchen alone. My daughter said she heard a door slam and the refrigerator door open and shut. She said she just knew that someone had been there because she saw the food move. The refrigerator was an older model, and while the door wouldn't close, it would only close about 10 to 20 degrees, depending on the size of the refrigerator. It would open all the way if you put the door against the refrigerator and shut it. On another occasion, I was walking from the living room into the dining room and I heard a door slam very quietly. We were all in the kitchen and the dining room was locked. No one else was home. I turned around and there was no door there. I felt like it was someone trying to scare me. I looked and saw that the door had been closed but then opened again. One day, I was taking a shower and before I could get finished, I heard the water shut off. I got dressed and went back to the kitchen to check the water, and it was shut off. I got dressed again and returned to the kitchen. The water was on. I turned off the water in the kitchen and stepped out of the shower. I still regret not going when I was asked, but this is the closest I've had to a paranormal experience. About a decade ago, my mom was working at a grocery store, and her friend or coworker bought a new house. Well, not a new house, but an old house that she was moving into. She purchased it from an old lady who left quite a bit of furniture in the basement. My mom said her coworker assumed this old lady just couldn't get any of it up the stairs and simply left it. I don't know what that meant in regards to the real estate deal, but I'd be pretty furious if I bought a house and had to clear out old couches out of the basement. Once she moved in, she told my mom that she thought the place was haunted. I vaguely remember the details, but my mom had said she told her things would fall. I believe she felt like she was being pushed downstairs. I remember something about this woman getting hurt, but it's been so long that I don't know. What I do remember clearly is that she told my mom her house was haunted. She was scared of the basement, and she said a man in the house that was very unhappy with her being there. My mom has always believed in the paranormal. I kind of did. I'm still scared of the unknown. I believe that things are plausible, but if I hear a noise at night, my first thought isn't ghost. It's just a noise. I've never truly believed that ghosts or the paranormal are real. I just like to believe it's real, to an extent. My mom, however, does, mainly because of my sister. She's told us all that she's seen people since she was a child. My mom has told us times when my sister would get scared and come upstairs saying she saw something. My brother remembers her saying, "A man is in my room." She fully admitted it and came out in her teens, apparently breaking down and telling my mom that she's always seen dead people. I never really believed her, or maybe assumed that it was possible, but I've known my sister long enough to know that I'd have very serious doubts about her saying that. My mom brought my sister over to the house, and together they walked through it with the owner, my dad, my sister, and my mom. My mom swears by this, but in the basement, my sister went white and told my dad that someone was standing behind him. She says he has red eyes. The woman who owned the house was shocked and apparently asked something like, "You see him too?" They both seemed sick with fear, especially when they talked about the red eyes. I don't remember the details about the house or where they went first, but I remember what my mom told me that made my sister leave crying. They were upstairs, and she said my sister and the woman either heard or saw something in the bedroom. They were walking towards the bed, and my mom swears on her life what happens. I really do regret not going with them for the visit. I wish I could have seen it with my own eyes. My mom said they both screamed. My sister and the woman both screamed with fear, with dread, and my sister ran out crying. They both said the man with red eyes popped out from under the bed yelling. I wish I could have seen it. I feel like one of them was startled and it spooked the other. My mom swears that they screamed at the same time, in the same way. I do remember that for a long time, the woman would avoid the basement. She went to a church to get a priest to bless the house. She told my mom the priest was unable to do anything and that they had called for someone higher to come out from the big city near us. She told my mom that eventually someone put bags in the corners of her basement and told her they would ward away the spirits. Some bag of spice or something, I don't remember, but that it seemed to have worked. I'm a heavy skeptic, but I know my mom and I know my sister. They both swear by what happened, and even if I think that my sister made it up, that my mom believes her and is just filling in the blank spaces with things because she wants to believe, I absolutely regret not going with them to see that reaction in person. It's the closest thing I've had to a personal experience other than a few other things my sister has said. I wish I had gone with them. I forgot what time, either 1 to 3 in the morning. My room is to the right of the top of the stairs, door wide open because my parents hate it when I close my door. I was watching The Fosters on Netflix in my bed when all of a sudden I hear someone walking downstairs. I instantly thought it was someone in my family since, peeps gotta pee. I turn my phone off and wait till they're done with their business. But then I hear the footsteps walking up the stairs along with growling sounds like some big animal. They were heavy footsteps, but it didn't sound forceful. It sounded natural, like their footsteps are just naturally heavy. I'm telling you, when I froze in my bed and just watched my room entrance like a hawk, I did. I was freaking the fudge out. And since my door is wide open, I was like, oh, hell fudging no. Thing is, it walked up about 12 or 13 steps, have 17 in total, trust me, I count, before I heard it run back down, like turn around and just sprinted down the stairs. I stayed in my bed for a good 5 to 10 minutes of silence before getting out and checking what or who that was. It wasn't my sister. She was asleep upstairs in her room. My dad was out cold. He just finished like a 12-hour shift a couple hours ago or something. Mom and 2 brothers were sleeping on the living room floor. Mom and 5-year-old brother on the outside, while my 9-year-old brother slept between them. Looked around the house. No one. Everything was completely silent. So as I do quick math, 13-year-old I was, I went back upstairs and was like, you know what? I'm just imagining things. I must be tired. Well, I wasn't, LOL. I do all-nighters daily, so I went back to watching The Fosters, and I poop you not. It wasn't even 5 minutes later when it fudgin' happened again. I froze, phone off, watched, heavy footsteps, deep growling, except it went up 5 or so and ran back down. Okay, I'm like, WTF, what the actual fudge? But I ain't no wimp. 5 minutes later, I get out of bed. All my family members didn't even move a mother flippin' inch. I fudgin' walked back upstairs and forced myself to sleep. Never happened again. What is the most scared you have ever been? Not safe for work. School shooting. I was a junior in high school, and a recent transfer student who got expelled at another school started shooting in the commons. Everyone hangs out in the commons before school, so it was super crowded and dangerous. I remember hearing the first shot and thought a table collapsed. No one even batted an eye. My orchestra teacher came out of his office and was immediately suspicious and said, "You guys, what was that?" Then a few seconds later, the second bang. We knew then what was happening. I happened to be in the orchestra room right next to the commons, and we had an exit that led to the parking lot. But in school, they teach you whenever there's an emergency to hide in a corner. I remember trying to hide in a practice room, but it was locked. Then my friends and I ducked under a piano, and students started swarming in the room from the commons. At that point, our orchestra teacher said, "Go," and had us run out the exit instead. It was a brave decision he made, and running to our cars was the longest run of my life. I remember ducking as I ran because I thought there might be other shooters aiming for us runners. As I ran, I realized I didn't even have my car keys or phone and didn't know where to go. Luckily, we made it to the back of the parking lot and met up with a few friends and crammed 6 of us in a 4-seater. I'll never forget the faces of my peers around me, scared with fear, and I'll never forget legitimately thinking I might die that day. After aimlessly driving and making phone calls to our parents with one phone, we were able to watch the news and saw that there was no one injured. It turns out our government teacher bravely tackled the shooter to the ground. He was known throughout the state and even threw a pitch for the Mariners game. I'm very grateful it didn't end how most shootings do. My now ex-husband's drug dealer came to the house when I was home alone. I was in the back bedroom when he busted the front door open. I hid in the closet under piles of blankets like a bad horror movie. I called 911 and whispered everything into the phone. He came so close to me so many times. He was on the phone with someone screaming he's gonna fuck this place and my ex up. The cops got there, guns drawn, and he runs up the street and they catch him. I am 100% sure that I would have gotten at the very least beat up. Just so thankful my girls weren't home. I think I wrote about this in a different post a while back. I was in Bahrain for shore leave, and me and my buddy got a cab to go to a shopping mall to look for bootleg movies. While driving there, the driver went down some back alleys, and I got very uneasy feeling. This was during the time when beheading was happening a lot. I told my friend I got an odd feeling. I started to look around and noticed men on the roofs, looking down and moving around on the roof, and noticed the road was not very crowded. I went into fight or flight mode and took out a little knife I had and told the driver, "Bring us back to the base." He said we were close, so calm down. I told him to take us back now or I will stab you. I must have had a very serious face because he instantly stopped and drove us back. My friend said he had a feeling as well, but just ignored it. I have many, and parsing over which takes the cake just isn't in the cards, but I've got my go-to. When I was a kid, my parents worked long hours. This led me to being raised by my hard ass of a granny. She was by herself with a modest farm. On that farm was a small hay barn. It was a tin-clad barn on 3 sides and the roof with an open front. 3/4 of the sheltered space was for square-baled hay. The remaining space was for equipment. This was to the left side of the hay if you faced into the barn. So we were raised together, my cousins, my brother, and I. And looking back, I can't remember many times that I was afforded solitude on the farm, but this was one of them, unfortunately. I had an older cousin, 8 years older to be exact. He was a jerk, and he had a lighter, and I stole it. My memory of this event is vivid, and like all vivid memories, it begins and ends with precision at point A and point B. I'm holding my jerk of a cousin's lighter. I'm alone in the hay barn, square bales and stacked to the roof. So close that the older kids who stacked the bales said they had to belly crawl to place the final layer. I'm looking up at a wall of dry hay. I don't feel a single notch of malice. I just sort of need to set it on fire. To my right, 3 bales over, and up a bit, I can see the head end of a rat snake sticking out of a bale. He's only one half of a snake. I stand there looking at the dead snake, thinking about nothing, really. And then I put the lighter to a long piece of straw, sticking out at my chest. Like a fuse, I lit it. That was it. The most scared I've ever been. I was a child, 10 to 12 years old, alone, setting my grandma's hay on fire, no regard for her or her cattle, before I snapped the lighter. None while I lit the wick of the straw. And I'll tell you all, the flame crawled up the straw, but it ran up the bales. In seconds, there was a wall of flames in front of me, and I was panicked. Unbelievably, even to me, even to this day, I put it out. I vividly remember throwing my body against the bales and slapping wildly at the hay. I swear I heard a roar as I beat at it. My eyes were closed the whole time, but then, when I opened them, the fire was out. I couldn't believe it. And that's where it ends. No memory afterward. I know my parents picked me up that evening. I'll forever wonder what that was like. No one knows about it to this day. I'm 39. I was in Atlanta by myself in an Airbnb. I was up in the middle of the night getting ready for my flight at 5 a.m. Well, around 2 a.m., I heard someone try to open my door. It was a single room with a door leading to the outside, and tried to break in. When that didn't work, they tried to look through the blinds. I was a 21-year-old woman weighing about 100 pounds, aka I'm an easy target and can't defend myself. When I didn't hear anything, I got an Uber and asked the driver to make sure there was no one there before I left. When we drove around the corner, there was a large man standing at the corner of the house, maybe 10 feet away from the door. I was so scared and couldn't stop shaking. Not that good of a story. Probably had worse scares, but can't think of anything else right now. But I think in November or so, I had my window open and it was late at night. I was just on my phone and all of a sudden I heard what sounded like leaves crackling, and it got closer and stopped in front of my window, and I was literally frozen in fear. I texted my mom about it, but she was deep asleep. A few minutes later, I heard the leaves crackling sound again, where I thought was outside my window, then stopped again. After about 30 minutes of being in complete fear and silence, I hadn't heard the sound again, so I was afraid they were outside my window still. I moved and looked at my closet, and turns out what I was hearing was my cat on a bag full of clothes in my closet making all those noises. Pretty great. I was at a public pool, packed as hell. I hear, "That kid said you're ugly," over all of the noise. Next second, I'm plunged into the water, being held down for a solid 8 seconds until they release. I gasp for air as I dash out of the pool into my mom's arms, saying, more like the crying, talking type, that someone drowned me over there. My mom, being the warrior she is, runs into the pool yelling at every kid on who did it. It got so bad that the lifeguard and all of the parents got involved. They found the kid and his mom, who were banned for life. I was never so scared and probably never will be again. About 15 or so years ago, I was the delivery driver for Papa John's Pizza. I was the only driver for the evening shift, and we'd closed around 1 a.m. in my local area. It wasn't the best part of the city. I live in a huge city, but never really had an issue with people. Everybody loved the pizza guy and the pizza they brought. One unfortunate night, my manager got a call for a delivery with a weird address. She told me it sounded strange, but this is the last delivery, just make it fast and come back as quickly as you can. I grab the food, get in my decent car, and drive out there. The address looks strange to me. Keep in mind, I have been delivering for a few months, if not years now, and I basically memorized my entire area of delivery space, so the address didn't make any sense. Regardless, I didn't think much of it, and maybe the customer was drunk and didn't speak clearly, which happened more often than you think. I get out of the address, and of course I cannot find it because it's a made-up one. However, the caller was intelligent enough to get the street and block number almost correct. I arrive. There's one guy just standing outside on the sidewalk and waves me down. This has happened before, but usually in front of a house waiting for me outside. This should have been a red flag, but I didn't have a reason to distrust the customer. I stopped near him, and he apologized for giving the incorrect address and just wanted to get some food in him. I felt a bit sorry and said, "Here you go, here's your order." He continued to talk, asking if I could give him a ride back to his place, which is just across the street. I should have had red flags blaring in my mind, but I trust people way too easily. Agreed, and he was acting very strange, like looking around all inside my car and the things within. You can probably tell where this is going. I get to where he lived, dropped him off, and then he asked me to walk the pizza up to his place for an extra tip. Why not? Problem was, as soon as I got out of the car, 4 other guys immediately appeared, which seemed like thin air, and then proceeded to jump me, literally knocking me out with one punch to the head. The pizza tragically fell to the ground, forever being ruined by the unkept and atrociously dirty pavement. I believe I was out cold for what seemed like 6 hours, but was only about 15 seconds. When I came to, they had already stolen my wallet, keys, and just about everything out of my car. 2 of them had guns pointed at me and told me if I made a sound, they would kill me. That was the scary part. I may have been in denial because I complied with all their requests, and they even treated me like one of the guys, stating, "Wow, you really got knocked out. Here's a cigarette to calm your nerves." They instructed me to walk down a long parking lot to the wall and not turn around, otherwise they would kill me. I complied, still in utter and complete shock. It took me about 45 seconds to reach the end of the parking lot. Defiantly, I turned around, and they were already gone, along with my car. I don't think I've ever ran as fast as I did to the nearest home I could pound on the front door. This was before everybody had cell phones to plead for help. I apparently got a young couple that were tweaked out of their mind, but they took pity on me. I asked if I could use their phone to call 911, but they seemed way too tweaked out on drugs and didn't want police near their place. They offered to take me to a payphone. I didn't decline. I was basically in tears to the point I couldn't feel the rest of my body. Called the police, they arrived, took my statement, and attempted to locate the muggers. Nothing came from it, and I never found out what happened. I'm just happy to be alive, but that is by far the most fear I've ever had. Probably why I'm a willing social hermit now and refuse to interact with people. I've had a number of unusual things happen to me, but I've always been strangely calm in life or death situations. Been in a serious car crash, witnessed a plane crash, evacuated a critically injured young child from the wilderness via helicopter, but the one that comes to mind is something that happened at work last summer. I was doing scientific field work on a hot midsummer day. We were doing some maintenance on a grid of small animal traps. Now it was hot out, and the trap line zigzagged up and down a cliff, so I was breathing heavily. Then I choked on a deer fly. It was the silliest thing. I inhaled too hard, but it was lodged in there, and my airway was completely blocked. My colleague was all the way over the ridge, and I realized I wouldn't have time to get to her before passing out. I was terrified. My grandma taught me how to do the Heimlich on myself when I was younger, and I threw myself onto a fallen tree that was about the right height. It dislodged the fly, and I ended up swallowing it. I just laid there on the forest floor for a while, eyes streaming with tears, thinking, wow, that would have been such a stupid way to die. I still panic a little bit when I can hear a fly buzzing around my head. I think watching my dad dying within 4 days of hospice care really terrified me, seeing him deteriorate so fast and not being able to talk and sleeping a lot. It's been stapled into my brain since he's passed, which was this past October. It's like another set-off for my anxiety, how fragile and short life is, and it haunts me in my sleep. I used to work at a gentleman's club as a dancer to pay my way through college. One night, I was walking to my car and was going to grab a cigarette while waiting for my BF, now fiancé, to finish up what he was doing. He was the bouncer, ATT. A guy grabbed me and slung me over the hood of my car, then tried to rape me. I bit him on the arm and kicked him. Next thing I know, there was a knife sticking out of my side, and my guy had the other guy pinned on the ground. I passed out from blood loss. It was terrifying, and I stopped walking to the car alone after that. Honestly, all of my most terrifying moments happened while I was working there. I happened to be living in Chile when the 2010 earthquake happened. I woke up between 2 and 3 a.m. out of a dead sleep. Did not feel sick or have a nightmare. I couldn't understand why I was awake. Within a minute or so, the window began to rattle. Then the ground and house began to rock back and forth. The ground didn't shake per se. It felt like we were on a table and someone grabbed onto it and pushed it back and forth. I wondered if the house was going to come down. The stories about seismic events have a specific sound are true. It sounded like a train passing by. As the quake ramped down, I felt my heart pounding. I remember the sound of my heart pounding was so loud I couldn't hear anything else. I've never been so terrified in my life. The feeling of knowing I had zero control of the situation was humbling. Knowing the Cascadia subduction zone could go at any minute fills me with dread. When I was in my 4th grade, my dad went crazy in the middle of the night. I was woken up at 3 a.m. in the morning by him slamming stuff and screaming. I was paralyzed by fear until my mom got me and we ran out of the house to go to school. When I got to school, I broke down crying, saying that my dad went crazy and was going to hurt my mom. Luckily, it was a day when my mom could come into school to help with my little brother's field trip or something. I think I remember most vividly is running out of the house and my mom spilling coffee on my homework by accident. I've gotten over this now and can joke about it like it's no big deal, but this is definitely the scariest thing that's happened because my dad is huge and could easily beat any one of us to death. I have had chronic pain for about 8 years and have not known in that time what it is like to have no pain. I was unwell and taken to emergency. Turns out I had meningitis, didn't know at the time. My body had some weird stress response and made my blood sugar crash. I'm not diabetic, but started slipping into a coma. Started uncontrollable spasms, then went blind, lost feeling in my whole body except for tingling pleasure in my eyes, then full body paralysis. I could still hear what was going on, but then suddenly my pain was gone. At that point, my brain just broke. I was sure I was about to die. Managed to garble, could not move my lips. Pain's gone, bird's gone, and heard my partner shriek because he thought I was going to die too. Years ago, my family and I lived in an older apartment building. The kitchen had one large and very heavy hardwood dish cabinet that was anchored into the ceiling. It was over the sink and extended partially over the refrigerator. One day, I was putting away stuff in the kitchen and my 4-year-old son came into the kitchen to get something to drink. I stepped around the corner to get a bag of groceries and heard the loudest crash I've ever heard. I looked around the corner and saw that the large cabinet had come loose and crashed to the floor, and I didn't see my son. I was terrified, thinking it had fallen on him and surely killed him. I've been through tornadoes. I've had guns pulled on me. I've been in a few car wrecks. I've almost had a farm tractor and a bulldozer turn over on me. None of those can compare to the fear and helplessness I felt seeing that shelf and broken crockery all over the floor when I knew my son had been standing right under it when it fell. Thankfully, he'd been protected by the open refrigerator door. The corner of the shelf had hit the door, which was above my son's head, and had bounced, knocking the shelf sideways and away from him. I didn't see him because my son had time to run around the corner. I was shaking so badly I almost collapsed. I had to sit down for a long time before I could walk again. I'm just glad my wife wasn't home so she didn't have to experience that. After that, it takes a whole lot.